Weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst komm, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is when we take some time out of our day on a Saturday evening, because none of us have anything else to do that's better than this, and we watch the real far left. We do not watch the Democrats. The Democrats are not the real far left. We do not watch the progressives. The progressives are not the real far left. We don't even watch the well, every once in a while we will dabble in democratic socialist. But the fact of the matter is that when you start getting to know the real far left, the radical revolutionary socialists, the most dystopian of the dystopian, you find out that the radical revolutionary socialists do not consider the democratic socialists to be far left. They don't like the democratic socialists because the democratic socialists are too close to capitalism. So we go as far left as we can go, because what we found out about a year and a half ago, is that when we watch the farthest of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian, these are the people who are responsible for every crazy thing that we are experiencing in the world today. If you want to know why critical race theory is still being taught in public schools, and yes, it is, yes, even in Florida, yes, even in red states, these people are the ones who did it. If you want to know why gender ideology is being taught in schools, yes, it still is, yes, even in Florida, yes, even in red states, the people we watch on Socialism Saturday are the ones that did it. If you want to know who's attacking parental rights in this country, these people are the one doing it. If you want to know who's driving the climate change nonsense, if you want to know who just protested Vivek Ramaswamy's event in Iowa that was all over Twitter with climate change nonsense, it's these people. Every crazy thing that you see happening in our world today can be traced back to these people. And so I thought about a year and a half ago, why don't we just go directly to the source? Why don't we go to the root of the problem and just start watching them and just start listening to them? Because it turns out that the radical revolutionary socialists are not only more organized than all of the rest of us, they put everything online. They put their conferences online. They put their events online. They put their book launches online. All you need to do is figure out where to find it and who to look out for. And once you figure out that, you can figure out everything that they're doing, and then you can reverse engineer it so you know how to fight back against them. But the very first thing you need to do is, of course, listen to what they have to say. And that is what we do on Socialism Saturday. We listen to what they have to say. And so today we are going to be, hang on a second, I should have something on my screen that's not on my screen. Oh, jeez, I'm crow. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. My computer's about to explode. I'm getting the spinning wheel of death. No, no, don't give me the spinning wheel of death right now, computer. I can't handle it. Oh no, don't do this to me. Of course it's doing it to me. Well, I'm getting the spinny wheel of death on my computer. Please go ahead and mount that like button for me, guys. Mounting the like button will let YouTube know to actually recommend my content. All right, I fixed the spinny wheel of death. We're cool. We're cool. But I want to show you what we are. Yes, the computer was on strike for a brief moment, but I want to show you what we're watching today. Now, we actually haven't watched Haymarket Books for a minute here because Haymarket Books has been really focusing in on content around Israel and Palestine. And as much as I hate to admit it, and I think most of us hate to admit it, we actually agree with the I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I know many people in my community actually agree with the socialists on Israel and Palestine. And it's no fun to watch socialists when you actually agree with the things that they're saying. So we haven't been watching Haymarket Books lately, but they did a presentation just 3 days ago. Hang on, almost there. Hang on. I know. It's been a busy day. I apologize for not having my shit together. They did a presentation 3 days ago called Reclaiming Freedom, a Boston Review launch event. Now, that's not really descriptive, and I wasn't really sure kind of what to make of that. Don't worry, Mr. Nobody. I'm going to give you a solution for that in a second. I'm going to give you a solution for that. This presentation was streamed on January 9th, 2024, so just a few days ago. Freedom has a dual legacy. On one hand, it stands for the greatest struggles long associated with the left, from abolition and anti-colonialism to women's and queer liberation. On the other hand, it has long been the watchword of the exclusionary right, playing a central role in the politics of neoliberalism and resurgent white nationalism. Rejecting this view of freedom as an exclusively right-wing concern, the latest issue of Boston Review, Reclaiming Freedom, aims to reestablish freedom as a fundamental political value, essential to any vision of a more just world. Now, before I introduce you to the people we're going to be listening to today, so essentially this is going to be a presentation about what socialists believe freedom means. So I want you guys, this is a pop quiz for the chat. What do you guys believe socialists mean when they say the word freedom? Because I'm betting it's going to be a little bit different than what we believe freedom means, isn't it? Chad is in. They mean freedom from capitalism. That's right, Chad. Well done. Because these people very literally believe that that no one in the world is free as long as we have capitalism, which is defined as private property ownership. Freedom from capitalism, freedom from capitalism, freedom from You guys are so good. Maybe my questions are just getting too easy. It means liberation from capitalism. You're right, Stony Baloney. It does not mean free speech. It does not mean free speech at all. Freedom from capitalism. Well, equity. What does equity mean, Liquid Marble? What does equity mean? Is equity different than freedom from capitalism, or is equity just a different way to say freedom from capitalism, or a more nuanced way to say freedom from capitalism? Freedom from capitalism, freedom from capitalism, freedom from capitalism. They could also mean freedom from the gender binary, which does, of course, mean freedom from capitalism because they believe capitalism created the gender binary. Freedom from work, universal health care, freedom from capitalism. Exactly. Freedom from private property. Equity means everyone has the same thing, but liquid marble, can equity and capitalism, which is defined as private property ownership, can equity and capitalism exist in the same place at the same time? Can you have equity if we also have capitalism? Equity is justice. Well, it's some justice because it means everyone has the same thing. Managed outcomes, Jane. That's a good way to put it. Freedom from the oppression of capitalism, from working for others for the means of life. Exactly. Equity cannot exist under capitalism. Those two things can't exist at the same time. So if they're saying equity, fine, but that also does mean freedom from capitalism, because if they create a society that is built on equity, capitalism or private property ownership cannot exist. Well done, guys. Great start for the show today. Who are we going to be hearing from today? We're going to be hearing from Aziz, who is a professor at Boston College. We're going to be hearing from Elizabeth, who is a professor at George Washington University. We're going to be hearing from William, who is a professor at McGill University. And we're going to be hearing from Mark, who is a professor at Rutgers University. So lots of college professors today, the very same people who are influencing young minds, as it turns out. That's what we're going to be watching today on Socialism Saturday, guys. But before we get into it, I have a couple orders of business. Now, number one, for those of you who enjoy my streams on a regular basis, I don't just stream on Saturday at 6 p.m. I also stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m., so a little bit earlier, but that's just the way the schedule works out. And a lot of you tell me, they're like, Carlin, YouTube never notifies us when you go live. And I'm like, I know, bro. I know. I'm shadow banned to high heaven on YouTube. The only reason I'm even still doing YouTube is because it's my place to do my research. And then if people want to come and join me for research and learn a thing or two, I'm more than happy to have them. But I am shadow banned to high heaven on YouTube. YouTube does not notify people when I'm going live. YouTube unsubscribes people from my channel all the time. So I have a workaround solution for that, and it's called The Cult. Now, as you all know, I have about 12 billion Substacks. Okay, I don't have quite that many, but I have a lot of them. I have a whole bunch of different Substacks. This allows me to create a list where you can get notified both in the Substack app and through an email of when I make a new post on the Substack. This is not to be confused with my main Substack. This is something you have to sign up for separately. But if you go to thecult.substack.com, what will happen, and sign up for email notifications or download the app, what will happen is when I do things like today's episode of Socialism Saturday, you will get a notification that I'm going live. And not only will you get that, you will get the links I'm going live at, and you will be able to see what we're watching before the stream starts, so you can decide whether or not you want to come. You can be like, Carlin, this is not something I really want to watch today. You can go do something else. Or you can say, yeah, I'm not missing that one. So you get a little sneak preview of what we're going to be watching. That is the, entire purpose of the cult.substack.com, is to provide a workaround for YouTube nonsense. So if you want to get notifications from me directly in ways that will never be messed with by YouTube, go ahead and sign up on the email list for that, thecult.substack.com. And that's my little workaround. It's totally free. You can sign up to make donations through it if you want to, but you don't have to. And so that's my solution for that. Of course, you do also want to make sure you are subscribed on my main Substack, which is Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com. If you are not subscribed to any of my, if you are subscribed to one of my other Substacks and you're not subscribed to this one, that's a mistake. You have to subscribe to all of them separately, okay? I create different Substacks because people have different interests. And so some people want to be signed up for one and not the other. That's cool, man. But of all the Substacks you want to be signed up to that I run, this is the one you want to be signed up to, because this is where I put all my best Unwoke content. If you're here for Socialism Saturday, then there is no reason why you're not subscribed to this Substack, because if you want additional content, breakdowns, plain language explanations, clips, things like that, like basically all week long, almost every single day I'm posting on the Substack, head over to Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com and sign up. And of course, if you want to support the work I'm doing, the very best thing you can do is sign up as a paying supporter for $8 a month or $80 a year. And guys, I would really, really love to just kind of kick things off. I would really, really love if I can get 10 new supporters signed up on the Substack tonight. And the reason I say that is there is a conference that I want to go to cover in a couple months. And the way I fund going undercover at conferences is through subscriptions to the Substack. It's a really good one. It has to do with teaching and queer stuff and all that. And that's all I'm going to say for right now. But I need additional subscribers to the Substack in order to be able to fund it. So if I could get 10 new supporters signing up tonight, that would be really great. It would help me out. It wouldn't pay for the whole thing, but it would be a nice little boost to get things on their way. And of course, you get access to a variety of perks, to include the supporter Discord, to include community Zoom calls, to include 10% off in the Unwoke Art merch store, to include all sorts of other stuff. But most importantly, you are funding the work I'm doing because I'm 100% completely grassroots funded by you. I can't do it without you. And so I really, really, really do appreciate it. There's also lots of premium content on the Substack that you can only get if you're a supporter. And there will be more coming expeditiously this week. So that's another thing as well. And then lastly, yesterday on the stream, we started joking around, as we're prone to do. And I was inspired on the stream to make a new design. And I wasn't sure I was going to put it up in the merch store. I wasn't. But I put it up on Twitter. I put it up on Instagram. It got some great reactions to it. And so I am pleased to have the official announcement of the brand new Socialists Are Gay collection in the Unwoke Art Store. You can get it on t-shirts, you can get it on hoodies, you can get it on sweatshirts, you can get it on bags, you can get it on a mug, you can get it on posters, all sorts of good stuff. It's a propaganda poster in the style of communist that says pretty clearly, socialists are gay. And so if you want that, and I also got to do some colors on this one that I don't normally do. So it's like, I like this nice, like drab color palette for the propaganda poster. So I've got some cool colors you can get with it. You get this red, dark gray. You can get it on a cream color if you want. You can get it on military green. You can get it on mustard. Or you can even get it on autumn, not to be confused with the socialist that stalks my chat every once in a while, but a different type of autumn. You can get that all. I, of course, prefer black because I think black makes everything pop. But sometimes it's nice to wear a color, like on Socialism Saturday. I always wear red for reasons. So you can get that in the Unwoke Art store right now. Again, hoodies, sweatshirts, long sleeve shirts, posters. The posters look so sick. Look at, I mean, who wouldn't want that hanging in their home? Who wouldn't want that hanging in their home? The Unwoke Art store is the only place you can get it right now, guys. So let me pop this in the chat. Let me pop that in the chat. And if you enjoy it, and again, guys, if you sign up as a paying member of my Substack, you get 10% off all of your merch purchases in the Unwoke Art store. You get a coupon code almost immediately. Where you're going to find your weekly perks for the Substack is going to be in this here newsletter. Not that this is the one from this past week, but I send them out every single Sunday. And so you get your weekly perks as a part of the Unwoke Roundup newsletter that will go out tomorrow. So you got to get all signed up today. Get your discount code, all that good stuff. And then you can get some cool ass merch in the Unwoke Art store. All right, guys, that is all I have. Let's get started. Oh, actually, no, we have to go over the rules. I always forget we have to go over the rules. So, guys, if you are new to Socialism Saturday, please let us know you are new to Socialism Saturday in the chat. Now, there are, well, I won't so much say rules. This is helpful guidance. Sometimes we need to provide guidance for people who are new. Sometimes we need to provide guidance for people who've been watching Socialism Saturday for a while. Now, if you are new to socialist, if you are not yet fluent in the language of socialist, the purpose of Socialism Saturday is not just to own the libs. It's not just to laugh at socialists. It's not just to do any of those things. What we are doing here is we are doing an immersive course. Milo, sometimes we just have to go with the path of least resistance, all right? Don't complain about the merch. What we are doing here is an immersive course in the language of socialist, because it might sound as though the far left is using the same language as us, but they are not. They might be using the same words, but they do not have the same definitions. You only learn this over time of watching them, or that's at least the best way to learn it. And so the purpose of what we're doing here is to listen. Listen is the key word. We are listening to what the left is saying. We are understanding them for their perspective, and we are using that to try to come up with ways to subvert all of the nonsense that they're doing in the world. But you cannot defeat an enemy you do not understand. And sadly, because conservative influencers are lazy and stupid, there is a ton of misinformation out there about who the far left is and what they actually believe. And because conservative influencers are lying to and misleading their audiences about who these people are, they are putting up strategy after strategy after strategy that is failing because they don't understand the people that they're fighting. So we are going to be the ones that understand the people that we are fighting. That is the whole point of this. So, socialists speak in a coded language. If you feel like you don't understand what's going on, if you feel like you don't understand what's being said, that's normal. Please ask questions in the chat. I will be happy to answer as many questions as I can. Other people in my chat, especially on YouTube, will be happy to answer questions as well. People who've been watching socialism with me for a really long time, so they're as well versed in it as I am. And we're all going to use this to come to a common understanding together. Now, you might have many inclinations to debunk these people and say, this argument is stupid for reason X, Y, B, and Z. They believe this and it's stupid. And we don't do that here. We don't do that. If you want to debunk people, go on to Twitter. The reason that we don't spend time debunking them is that it doesn't matter and it doesn't change anything. And every ounce of energy we spend debunking them and therefore dismissing them is an ounce of energy that we could be dedicating to listening to them and understanding them. Okay, guys, if debunking them was all that was required to defeat them, we already would have beat them. But we haven't. They're winning. They're winning massively. And so we don't waste time debunking them. I'm going to ask people to please refrain from doing that in the chat because it becomes really distracting. You have to think of this as a classroom. When you're coming to Socialism Saturday, you're not just coming to any stream where you can shitpost and act like a hooligan. This is a classroom, okay? I am the teacher of the class. You are the students in the class. Some of the people have been in the class for a really long time. They have status over you, okay? The mods have status over you because they've been in the class a really long time. They're like the TAs. You're here to learn. You are not here to argue with me. You are not here to argue with my mods. You are not here to advance your agenda. You are not here to create disruption. You are here to listen and to learn. And if you don't want to do those things, then you don't have to be here. There are lots of other places you can be on the internet. If you do have questions, I want to encourage everyone to ask their questions. Even if it seems like a stupid question, that's fine. Because this is really hard. It's complicated. Okay, it's complicated. So please ask questions if you have them. But if you are a longtime viewer of the channel and you keep asking the same question over and over and over and over and over again, at some point, I'm gonna get frustrated with you because I have to say the same things over and over and over and over and over again. And if you're asking the same question over and over and over and over and over again, it means you're not listening. Okay, so I will tolerate it for a while. But if you get a reputation for not listening, then I'm going to start getting really fucking bitchy. Okay? And that's just the way it goes. I am the Phil Knight of goddamn socialism. And I'm hard on you because I want you to learn. But if you are doing things to prevent your own education, that is your fault. That is not mine. Normal chat rules apply. Don't be a dick. That means you do not insult me. You do not insult other people in the chat. And no whining. If I ask you to stop doing something, please stop doing it. And lastly, again, Don't argue with me. You are welcome to have your own opinion, but when you start arguing with me, because I promise you, I've watched way more hours of these people than you have. I've thought about this way more than you have. I've gone deeper into the subject than any single person here. If you argue with me, you better fucking bring it, and you better know what you're talking about, because 99% of the time when people argue with me, they don't know what they're fucking talking about, and they get put in their place right quick, and then they end up getting banned in the chat. And I don't want you to get banned. But if you're going to be a dick in my chat, you're going to get what you get. All right? You're welcome to talk. You're welcome to talk. As long as you're not an asshole, nothing's going to happen. All right. Now we're really done. And now we can really get started. Guys, please make sure to mount the like button for me. Mounting the like button lets YouTube know to actually recommend my content to people. Let's see. Let's get this show started, guys. Again, we are watching a presentation from Haymarket Books. It is about an hour and 40 minutes long. Chad, you're welcome to make jokes, buddy. Just don't distract, okay? And if I ask you to stop, just stop, okay? Like, I don't mind joking around. I don't mind banter. We do a lot of banter in the chat. That's fine. But like at some point it does become disruptive, so I might ask you to stop, but just follow the rules, bro. Don't make this hard, okay? I don't want to ban people. I want everyone to be here. I want everyone asking questions. I just don't like it when it gets disruptive. This is complicated shit, yo. All right, guys. This is about an hour and 40 minutes long, so go grab yourself a snack, a drink. I've got some beer here. I hope you guys have some drinks as well. Let's learn what socialists mean by freedom.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aziz Rana.
Why is there an echo? Hopefully they fix that. Okay, this is a good time to remind people that socialists suck at technology. Socialists specifically suck at audio. And so hopefully they fix that fucking echo. Hang on.
I teach market. The folks at...
No.
Almost inevitably, we would...
Okay. We'll have to suffer through it for 2 minutes. Okay, everyone can do 2 minutes of bad audio. Everyone can do it. Okay, they it seems like they got it under control though.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aziz Rana. I teach law at Boston College and study the Constitution as well as ideas of freedom. I have a book called The Two Faces of American Freedom that came out about 10 years ago, and I have a new book that's about to come out called The Constitutional Bind, How Americans Came to Idolize a Document That Fails Us. I'm here as a participant in a recent Boston Review forum called Reclaiming Freedom. And I'm here alongside a series of wonderful co-participants that I'll like to introduce in just a moment in a bit greater depth. But first, I'll just say their names. So we have Elizabeth Anker, Mark Paul, and William Clary Roberts. The forum is itself a real collaborative product. There were a number of participants that took part in it, and there's also various people that I'd like to thank up front. So John McDonald at Haymarket for all of his work putting this together, as well as everybody at Haymarket. The folks at Boston Review that did a terrific job with the editing. So Deb Chasman, Matt Lord, Josh.
We made it.
Cohen.
Audio fix, kind of.
Now, the idea behind the forum was really to think about the state of freedom as a concept in American politics today. And in particular, I think many of us were struck by a very specific state of affairs in the US. The fact that freedom as a concept is something that we really think of or associate with the political left. That broadly speaking, ideas of freedom have circulated in many of the kind of emancipation and liberation struggles that the world has seen. So fights against slavery and segregation, patriarchy, colonialism, labor struggles for workers have all been deeply associated with the idea of freedom. And in many ways, we can think of it globally as a language of the left. And yet, in the US today, if you were to hear somebody just sort of invoke the term or say that their freedoms were under attack, almost inevitably we would imagine that that person is someone from the political right, and that the folks that
Correct.
tend to use the term freedom are very much associated not just with the right, but with an especially corrosive brand of conservative politics that seems increasingly present in collective life. And so the volume, in a way, wanted to explore this. How is it that a language that's so deeply embedded in the politics and traditions of the left is now in the US claimed, if not exclusively, then really substantially by right-wing figures and activists? And in order to do that, we had to then sort of engage with broad questions about, first, is this the case? Is this a matter of the right being successful at claiming narratives? Has the left and liberal forces just abandoned the field? Perhaps is that a good thing because the language of freedom might have
The
embedded within
audio
it certain
is
kinds of
gay.
corrosive
True.
features that sort of
True.
suggest control over
You won't be
outsiders
speaking
and
correct.
others?
Okay.
So should freedom.
As a reminder, because I still see people complaining about the audio, I cannot control Socialists' audio. I can't control it. So he's going to stop speaking at some point. Hopefully they get their audio issues sorted out, but complaining about the audio is not actually going to fix the audio because it's not coming from me and we just need to work through it. You can't learn socialist if you can't work through an audio issue here or there, okay? It's just this is constant. This is not even the worst audio we've ever had to deal with from socialists before. This happens all the time.
Be something that folks on the left are interested in at all? And more generally, to the extent that freedom is something that's worth reclaiming, what should its substantive content be? Should there be a much more expansive and kind of emancipatory horizon of what constitutes freedom? Or should freedom be organized through the everyday or through experiences of oppression that really focus on protection from rather than positive or expansive commitments to? So to kind of engage with all of this.
Actually, this is a really good point that Kurt's making. Watch out for how if they say freedom from or freedom to. I love that you brought that up, Kurt. Thank you.
Stuff. Again, we've got Elizabeth, Mark, and Will here. So Libby Anker is a professor of American Studies and Political Science at George Washington University. She's also
So Chad is asking, who are these people? Let's just do a quick review and he's going to introduce them, but I just want people to see this. So every single person we're going to hear from tonight is a professor at a major American university. So these are people who are actually teaching students in the classroom. These are not just like crazy people off the street. The guy that has the horrible audio is a professor at Boston College. We're going to hear from Elizabeth, who is a professor at George Washington University. We're going to hear from William, who is a professor at McGill University. And we're going to hear from Mark, who is a professor at Rutgers University. And I'll pop the link in the chat if people want to see what they're actually professors of. That is the link to the video, and that's all their bios are in the bottom. So that's who we're hearing from tonight. And I think it's important to know that because everything you're going to hear tonight is being taught to students in college. This is how they get their ideas out there, okay?
So the director of film studies there. Her work is in political theory and cultural studies with a focus on really the practices of freedom, violence, and power in US politics and culture. She's the author of numerous books and articles.
Do you guys want to vote on who's going to say capitalism first? I mean, this is a socialist presentation, so we're basically guaranteed that capitalism is going to be said in the course of this presentation. Do you guys want to vote on who's going to say capitalism first? All right, let's just do it. Hang on. Let me put a poll in the chat on YouTube. Hang on 1 second. 1 second. I should have probably already had this up. Apologies. Okay. Who is going to say capitalism first? Register your vote in the chat if you want it to count. Also, register on the poll just so we get a sense of the room. Is it going to be number 1? Is it going to be Elizabeth? Is it going to be number 2, William? Is it going to be number 3, Mark Paul? Or is it going to be number 4, the guy with the horrible audio. So 1 Elizabeth, 2 William, 3 Mark Paul, 4 bad audio guy. Let me know.
2 books, Ugly Freedoms, which is out recently from Duke University Press, and Orgies of Feeling, Melodrama and the Politics of Freedom, which was also out from Duke University Press. We also have Mark Paul, who's a professor at the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers. Mark has a PhD in economics and works on equality, its causes, consequences, and possible remedies. He also writes on climate change and just published a new book, congratulations, The Ends of Freedom, Reclaiming America's Lost Promise of Economic Rights, from Chicago University Press. And then finally, we have William Clare Roberts, who's a professor of political science, teaches political science at McGill. Will is a political theorist who, among other topics, explores Marx and Marxism, ancient Greek political philosophy, classical political economy, socialism, republicanism, theories of domination. Will is working now on a book called Radical Politics of Freedom, and is the author of Marx's Inferno, the political theory of capital, that was published by Princeton University Press. So I think our plan for the next 90 minutes or so is that each of us is going to begin with just a kind of short distillation of our contributions to the volume, and then say 5 minutes or so. And then after kind of working through our own comments, we're gonna have a conversation amongst each other, asking each other questions about our pieces, and maybe that'll take us through the hour, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And as somebody taking the moderator's prerogative, I'll begin by just sort of laying out the argument that I made in my piece. So for my contribution to the volume, I basically made an argument defending the need for the left to reclaim the language of freedom, but also saying that there are deep structural reasons beyond just this specific political moment why the right seems to have a particular kind of cultural purchase on arguments about freedom in the US that might actually be distinct in various ways from what we see globally. And so I'm just going to work through my own claims by focusing on 3 different points that I made. The first point is that in order to be able to understand the structural context in which freedom arguments tend to have regressive or right-wing connotations in the US, it's really important to link the domestic American story to the global context, and in particular to appreciate the extent to which the US is now and has been historically an experiment in various forms of imperial power. Okay, so let me just unpack this a little bit.
Oh, holy shit. Holy
US,
shit.
at
Holy
various
shit.
moments,
Holy shit. What does it mean when he says that the US has always been an experiment in various forms of imperial power? Pop quiz for the chat. This is a little bit more of an advanced question. That's okay if you don't know the answer. He is. Liquid marble. He's saying that America is a capitalist experiment. When he's saying that America is an experiment and it has always been an experiment in imperial power, it is a capitalist experiment. What that means is that for them, America has been flawed since the very beginning because it was built on a foundation of capitalism, which, remember, they define specifically as private property ownership. Yeah, Bill, this is really good. Capitalism and exporting capitalism around the world. So people ask all the time, right? People ask all the time, well, if they want to be socialists, why don't they just go live in Venezuela? Why don't they just go live in China? Why don't they just go live in Cuba? If they want to be socialists, go live in a socialist country. Well, they're not going to do that because they want socialism here because they believe that America is exporting capitalism all around the world. And so it's not enough for them to just go live in a socialist country. They have to destroy this country because if they can implement socialism here, that means they're going to be able to implement socialism everywhere. Yep, Westcott, imperialist equals colonizer. They might also call that settler. You're hearing the term settler a lot in regards to what's going on in Israel. And that means capitalist. which again means private property ownership.
Time. There have been really rich traditions of freedom, oftentimes connected to concrete manifestations of their opposite, of slavery, exploitation, and oppression on the ground. And these traditions of freedom have routinely emphasized ideas of self-rule. In other words, to be free means more than just not facing coercive power, the whims of arbitrary authority, but to actually enjoy something like control over the conditions of one's own life and the ability collectively to participate in shared decision-making about the most central sites of institutional life.
Hang on. Maldi has a question, and we'll do this as a pop quiz for the chat. I know what my answer is, but I want to hear your answers as well. Would colonizing a country mean turning it into a capitalist country? What do you guys think about that? Would colonizing a country mean turning it into a capitalist country? Yes, but why? Don't just say yes or no, explain why. Don't just say yes or no, explain why. Would colonizing a country mean turning it into a capitalist country? Oh, we've got Aladdin over on Rumble. He thinks we're socialists. Aladdin, perhaps sit your ass down and open your ears and listen before you mouth off in my chat, bro. Back to the question. Would colonizing a country mean turning it into a capitalist country? Why? They think it's because colonization equals capitalism, but why? Yes. Yes, because what colonizing means is to privatize something under the oppressive force of capitalism, which means essentially taking indigenous land away from the indigenous people and privatizing it under the oppressive force of capitalism. Because colonialism to them means forcing capitalism on others. Exactly. Yes, because they believe colonizers imposed the privatization of lands and property on the indigenous population. Yes, because they're taking property. Yes, because it would be implemented as the not quite liquid marble, not quite. Got to be more specific. Colonizing equals private property, which means capitalism. The only reason to colonize something would be to capitalize it. Because it would be upholding the capitalist system. Exactly. Well done. Well done. Pixel Propaganda on Rumble says those indigenous people colonized those areas themselves at the expense of other tribes. Pixel Propaganda, no, we're not playing that game. We do not debunk these people. That is not the point, and they would disagree with you. They would not agree with your assessment there.
Economic, political, spiritual. And there have been two basic ways in which you could imagine this kind of expansive idea of freedom and self-rule taking place. One way of thinking about it is that, well, in a complex society, whether in the 19th century or today, that in order for people genuinely to be free, then they're going to have to actually work together. Freedom requires solidarity, democracy, inclusiveness. Its function depends.
We're not even 10 minutes into the presentation and he just said the quiet part out loud. Look at what's on the screen right now. Freedom requires solidarity, democracy, and inclusiveness. You know at the beginning how I said that they don't believe that anyone is free under capitalism? They believe solidarity means everyone's a comrade, everyone's part of the collective. Democracy to these people means socialism. Every single time, yep, Chad, every single time these people say democracy, what they mean is socialism. Because they believe that democracy is basically like a socialist government. And then inclusiveness is also a reference to the collective. Exactly, Liz. Exactly. He's talking about like freedom can only exist when we have a collective socialist government. Let's just listen to that little bit again, just so you guys can hear it.
For people genuinely to be free, then they're going to have to actually work together. Freedom requires solidarity, democracy, inclusiveness. Its function depends on recognizing that you can't be free and a self-mastering person on your own. that economic independence requires interdependence. And so it's closely bound to participatory politics, to accounts of workplace democracy, and to really a vision.
Well, we got our sound fixed, so that's good. It's a little bit lower now, but that's okay because the sound is at least fixed. So what he just said is you cannot be free in a society based on individualism and meritocracy. Your freedom depends on other people. Did you guys hear him say that? Does that make sense? Exactly, Stony Baloney. You can't be free on your own. You can only be free when you are part of the collective. Let's listen again.
Inclusiveness. Its function depends on recognizing that you can't be free and a self-mastering person on your own, that economic independence requires interdependence. And so it's closely bound to participatory politics, to accounts of workplace democracy, and to really a vision of what we might think of as social democratic possibility in American life.
Oh, there it is.
But then there's always been another
There it
way
is. He explicitly just said that we can only be free under social democracy, which of course democratic socialism means socialism. It just means socialism that you vote for. And once you vote for socialism, ain't no going back from socialism. Chad, we're only in the first 10 minutes. And I don't think you've been here before. Stick around, bro. It's going to get crazier. I promise you.
Pursuing freedom, which conceives of freedom as zero sum, a fight over scarce resources, and entailing that my own freedom has to come necessarily at the expense of others, because not everyone can enjoy the benefits of collective life. And that particular brand of individualistic, atomized, zero-sum notions of self-mastery and self-rule, oftentimes in the US have been profoundly racialized because of the structures of slavery and its legacy. But more than that, there's been this other feature, which is the US was founded and grounded in a particular experiment in what I call settler empire. In other words, that early colonists were committed to a rich account of freedom, but they believed that in order to be able to benefit from that, they would have to have access to land, and they'd have to enjoy the benefits of what you can think of as free labor, that their own work life couldn't be grounded in degraded or coerced.
What did he just say? We talked about colonialization. He is about to explain why whiteness means capitalism. Did everyone catch that? He's about to explain why whiteness means capitalism. Chad, I don't mind you making jokes, bro. We do not use the term anti-white on this channel. We don't, because it's not even a correct indicator of what's happening. Watch, we're going to explain to you what's happening. Guys, why does whiteness mean capitalism? Pop quiz for the chat. Why does whiteness mean capitalism? Yup. He said capitalism took the land and slaves, and they thought that that was freedom. He's about to explain. I want to know if you guys can explain why whiteness means capitalism before we listen to him explain it. This is actually correct. The reason that the left is on the side of Palestine in that whole conflict is, to them, the Jews represent capitalism. So that's very good, shockingly good, actually. Nope, that's not why whiteness means capitalism. This is closer. Capitalism created race to exploit people's labor. Closer. Not fully correct, but closer. That's not correct. Nope, that's not correct. Guys, I've repeated this 19 ways from Sunday. Why does whiteness mean capitalism? I have written you guys cheat sheets on this. I've done videos on this. I expect everyone who watches my content on a regular basis to be able to answer this. Whiteness means capitalism because they believe, exactly, Jane, in for the win. Thank you for restoring my faith in humanity, Jane. What socialists believe is that capitalism, which is defined as private property ownership, created slavery. Slavery is the ownership of human beings as private property. Slavery created systemic racism. Every time you hear references to whiteness, white supremacy, racism. Those are not references to skin color. Those are references to systemic racism, with the system in systemic racism being capitalism or private property ownership. And the only way to eliminate systemic racism is to abolish capitalism and create a society based on equity. But it all goes back to the idea that human beings were owned as private property. That's why whiteness means capitalism. It is not a reference to skin color. That's why black people can be considered white too under this ideology. They're not talking about Africa. They don't care about Africa. They're talking about America. They never talk about Africa, bro. They don't care about slavery. They care about private property ownership and turning America into a Marxist society. That's all they care about. None of this is about skin color. You guys have convinced yourself it's about skin color when it's not. Now let's listen to him say it.
Of self-mastery and self-rule, oftentimes in the US, have been profoundly racialized because of the structures of slavery and its legacy.
See?
But more than that, there's been this other feature, which is the US was founded and grounded in a particular experiment in what I call settler empire. In other words,
see,
that early colonists were committed to a rich account of freedom, but they believed that in order to be able to benefit from that, they would have to have access to land, and they'd have to enjoy the benefits of what you can think of as free labor, that their own work.
Access to land is private property ownership, which is capitalism. Free labor is slavery, which is owning people as private property, which is also capitalism. Okay, pixel propaganda. I've already warned you once. We do not debunk on this stream. Debunking accomplishes nothing. If debunking was all that was required, we wouldn't be here right now. So this is about listening and learning. If you're not here to listen and learn and you only want to debunk, go hang out on Twitter, man. Don't do it here.
Life couldn't be grounded in degraded or coercive brands of economic control. And they solved this problem through the expropriation of indigenous land and through the use of coerced labor, particularly over enslaved Black people, their descendants, and then other migrant populations like.
So he said they solved the problem by taking the land from the indigenous people and privatizing it. That's what colonialism is, or colonization, whichever. And then they enslaved Black people, made them private property to work the land. Guys, Pixel's on Rumble, so there's a reason you can't see her. You're on YouTube.
The Chinese and Asian Americans in the late 19th, early 20th century. And at various moments in American life, in many ways, the politics of empire smoothed over the debates about freedom by making something like self-rule actually available for a small range of people. And across American history, what this has done is it's created moments in time in which for some to enjoy the benefits of freedom, that this kind of racialized account is felt like it's real and achievable. And it transforms a language that could be one that's universal, inclusive, and solidaristic into a language that is perhaps most culturally expressed within mainstream dominant life by a kind of libertarian, individualistic, atomized, individualized account of politics. So then, too, what does this mean? For me, this means that we shouldn't abandon freedom as a concept. And for a couple reasons. First, the fact that it's corrosive is in a way endemic to any notion of liberation or emancipation. That all ideas of freedom are bound or connected to the experiences of subordination that might exist on the ground.
What?
And for that reason, that
all experiences of freedom are bound to subordination?
That all ideas of freedom are bound or connected to the experiences of subordination that might exist on the ground. And for that reason, that projects of transforming social conditions necessarily link, forms of unfreedom and forms of freedom together.
Unfreedom.
So the fact that there's a kind of corrosive history isn't something to then say we should reject all emancipatory discourses or language. And at the same time, throughout American history, there have also been, movements from those that are oppressed at the margins to break through the terms that have been dominant, to create universal accounts of liberation. We see this within Black freedom struggles, within the labor movement, within indigenous politics and indigenous notions of self-determination, in which the idea of liberation, of freedom as self-rule, is something that is radicalized as a way of thinking about how freedom, democracy, and inclusion can actually be linked together. And indeed, to abandon the concept would be to do a disservice to the ways in which people that are most oppressed have conceived of their own politics and have turned, let's say, a struggle just to limit or restrain the most extreme forms of violence that they experience into an account of how one can actually live together in something that is genuinely utopian in the best sense. And so if that's the case, if there's both a corrosive history and it's a concept that shouldn't be abandoned, then what should we do now? And this is my third and final point, which is this highlights that the problem that the left has around freedom is a problem of narrative, but it's narrative grounded in sort of institutional and structural reality. In other words, that the right's advantages, because they're tied to the long sort of frameworks of imperial politics in American life, are advantages that have created sort of organic cultural ties.
I just want to make a general note here. Do you like half of the socialist presentations we watch are them responding to things that the right is doing? Now, the left always thinks they're losing, right? The left believes they're in a perpetual revolution. They think that they are always losing, and that's why they're always pushing so hard to push their ideas on society. And every time the right does anything, the left tries to reverse engineer and nitpick and analyze everything that they're doing. They write books about it. They have presentations about it. They have conference sessions about it. And they really pick apart, like, the right is doing this really well. So how can we take advantage of, how can we combat this thing that the right is doing really well and turn it around and use it in our favor? The point I'm making is the right doesn't do that. The right has no idea what the left is doing. The right is constantly in a circular firing squad where they're too busy destroying each other to pay attention to what the left is doing. But the left does presentations like this all the time. This presentation is a specific response to the right. And the fact that the right is being successful in claiming the term freedom, and they have not been successful in claiming the term freedom. So they're like, okay, the right is doing this really well. People like freedom. How do we make sure that we are conforming our strategy to this idea that people like freedom? How do we make people think that socialism is freedom? How do we make people think that Marxism is freedom? They have entire strategy sessions about this. This is why they win.
Between the way conservatives present and conceive of freedom and the kind of bedrock institutions of fundamentalist kind of market politics, racialized capitalism, unequal forms of voting rights and representation. And that in order to respond effectively, those on the left both have to articulate and defend powerful accounts of emancipation and equal and effective freedom for all. But they have to do so while
there'll be some more coming out soon, Russell.
Actually existing institutions. In other words, by creating an institutional landscape in which left ideas emerge organically, or kind of culturally connected to how people live and experience their workplaces, their schools, their neighborhoods. And that means
he just gave away how they do things. Hang on. What he said is they need to create a world in which left-leaning ideas just emerge organically from things that people are already doing in their life, in their workplace, in society. And those ideas, those left-leaning ideas, just naturally come about because it aligns with what they're already doing. This is how the left wins. The left doesn't win by going into streets and protesting and screaming and do the work, they don't protest by the crazy TikTok videos they don't win by the crazy libs of TikTok videos. That's not how they win. That's not how they win. How they win is they get into positions of institutional power that you don't even know about in colleges, in organizations, in governmental agencies, in education, in healthcare, in media, in entertainment. And they use those positions of institutional power to quietly implement laws and policies that slowly push people towards the left. And people don't even know what's going on. It's like when you take a frog and you put it in a pot of boiling water, the frog's going to jump right out. But if you take a frog and you put it in a pot of cool water and just slowly bring the water to a boil, that frog's going to sit there until it dies. We are the frog sitting in a pot of cool water, and the socialists are slowly bringing it up to a boil. And they're doing so to slowly push our entire world in the direction of the left in a way that to normal people feels like it's happening organically. And they're like, it's like making someone think that something is their idea instead of it being your idea. Does that make sense? Let's listen again.
Have to articulate and defend powerful accounts of emancipation and equal and effective freedom for all, but they have to do so while reconstructing actually existing institutions. In other words, by creating an institutional landscape in which left ideas emerge organically, kind of culturally connected to how people live and experience their workplaces, their schools, their neighborhoods. And that means, perhaps counterintuitively, the best way to actually pursue a program of freedom is to change the institutional terrain by altering, for example, the politics around things like voting, the way in which people inhabit their workplaces, the extent to which workplaces are profoundly hierarchical, combating foreign policy because of the ways in which American empire ends up feeding back into these zero-sum, belligerent, and highly nationalistic forms of individualized, atomized accounts of liberty, and also shaping, altering the way that we think of immigration politics, and the question of the border, which is a modern variant, long-standing modes of separating individuals on the basis of race and membership.
Do you guys think what's going on at the border is an accident? And it's not happening for white replacement. I know I've got some groypers in the chat or groyper adjacent people. It's not happening for white replacement. I know you guys think that. Now, white replacement is going to be an outcome of what's happening. That's an outcome, but that's not why they're doing it. And this is important to understand. I know groypers don't want to hear this. They're not doing it to replace white people. These people don't talk about race as much as you think they do. That's going to be an outcome. No, they don't, bro. You just interpret it that way because it feeds what you want them to say. That is an outcome of what they're doing. It is not the reason that they're doing it. They are doing it to slowly push our society towards the left. And if they do this white replacement thing as a result of doing it, they don't mind that because they don't care about race. You guys are the ones that care about race. They really don't. But the reason that they're doing it is to orchestrate every single system in our society to slowly move people to the left by instituting laws and policies in government, in organizations, et cetera, et cetera. And it's okay and I'm not trying to shit on the groypers right now. I'm really not. If you guys want to care about the white replacement outcome, that's not an argument I'm going to have with you right now. You're allowed to care about that. That is not the point I'm making. The point I'm trying to make is how they are orchestrating this. And if you don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, you're always going to be missing a part of how you can beat this back. Because there's one thing I know about the groypers. You guys do actually care about like beating this back, right? You guys care about reclaiming this. If you don't understand why they're doing it, then you can never beat them. So this is an important point. It's okay to care about the racial demographic implications of what they're doing. What I want you to understand, though, is that's not why they're doing it. They don't actually really care about race as much as you guys think they do. What they want is to create a socialist society in the United States. They are trying to elicit a Marxist cultural revolution in the United States. In order to do that, bringing in like oppressed working class people is helpful to them. That's why they're opening the border. It's also a destabilizing tactic. So the four goals of the woke left are always and forever the same. gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. So let me explain how this works in regards to the border. They've gained power by not only getting themselves into positions of institutional power in governmental agencies, also getting elected, they're using that power, excuse me, they're using that power to destabilize the system. How they're destabilizing the system is by letting in a boat ton of fucking immigrants from Mexico, South America, that sort of thing. So the influx at the border is designed explicitly to destabilize the system by bringing in a bunch of people into this country that are going to create a lot of problems. It's going to overwhelm the resources of the government. They're already having to house them in school districts and hotels and paying for them. Like this fight about where they go, that's destabilizing everything. It is specifically designed to overwhelm the resources that we have as a way of creating problems that impact everyone. The race thing is not why they're doing it. The destabilizing thing is why they're doing it. The race thing is just an outcome of what they're doing. It's like it's not entirely an unforeseen consequence, but it's just like that's not the purpose of it. Once they destabilize the system and they cause a lot of problems by letting all of these people in from the border, they're going to use that to attack capitalism. They're going to say, you know what sucks? Not all of these people are coming here because they don't have the resources that they need, and we don't have the resources to help them. And the reason that we don't have the resources to help them is because of capitalism. Capitalism caused this problem. Capitalism is creating all this chaos. The reason everyone is coming here is because of capitalism. We can't help them because of capitalism. It's all inequitable. They're going to use the destabilization that the border caused to attack the system of capitalism, which is defined as private property ownership. And then once they do that, they're going to say, how about we try Marxism? Because this capitalism thing, it's not working. It's causing all these problems. How about we try Marxism? Under Marxism, you're going to have everything you need. Everyone's going to be able to have the resources. Everyone's going to have the same access to resources, to money, to healthcare, to education. We're going to be able to take care of everyone in the world if we just institute Marxism. Now, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but that's reality. And if you guys don't understand this, then you can't fix this problem. That is what they're doing. They're trying to destabilize the system by overwhelming it so they can use the overwhelm in the system to attack capitalism so they can piss people off and get them to usher in Marxism as a replacement for capitalism. That's what they're doing.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Libby Anchor. So take it away with your contribution to the volume.
Great. Thanks for the nice introduction. My piece is thinking about the ways in which we still continue to idealize freedom. Let me explain what I mean. The forum for Boston Review are the special issues about reclaiming freedom. It's about reclaiming freedom broadly from the right in many ways that Aziz has just mentioned, right? Reclaiming freedom from free market versions of freedom that entail the freedom to exploit others for capital. It entails white supremacist versions of freedom that entail dominating non-white people. It's about reclaiming freedom from masculinist versions of freedom that entail controlling the lives and reproductive futures of others, as well as the freedom to enforce gender and sexual conformity. It also entails reclaiming freedom from settler colonial versions of freedom, which practice freedom in ways that include stealing territory and dispossessing populations. We know that freedom is in many ways the most popular value in the American political lexicon, but it has often been exercised in these ways, these right-wing ways, what I call in my recent book, ugly freedoms. When freedom is
This is the last time I'm going to address you, and if you keep bringing this racial bullshit into my chat, you're not going to be here any longer. I'm being serious. They don't hate white people. You see the person speaking on the screen right now? She's white. They have, most of the people at their events are white. This idea that they hate white people is something that you guys have created that has no basis in reality. Nothing they do is motivated by race. They don't talk about race as much as you guys do. They don't care what people's race is. They only care what your political affiliation is. If you are white and you oppose them, then you are bad. If you are white and you are on their team, then you are good. That is all they care about. If you are black and you oppose them, then you are bad. If you are black and you are on their team, then you are good. You know this because they called Larry Elder white. They've called Kanye West white. They've called Jay-Z white. Joe Biden said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't white. They flat out say in their presentations, you don't need to be white to engage in whiteness because it has nothing to do with skin color, bro. They don't hate white people. And if you guys keep clinging on to this, and I understand why you think this. I really, really do, because a lot of people have reinforced this for you. But I'm really trying to help you when I'm like trying to get this through to you. They don't care about skin color. They only care if you agree with them or if you don't. And you are never going to be able to beat them if you don't understand this factor. Rottweiler said that's why Marxists all over the world seem to be begging for Javier Milei to tank the Argentinian economy to blame liberalism, libertarian, and capitalism. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. No, they're not. No, they're not. White people who go to college are taught that whiteness means capitalism. We know, watch the video I did on my channel the other day, bro. They specifically know it means capitalism. Anyway, I do not want to continue to have this conversation with you about race because I've now given you very thorough explanations for why it's not about race. I write about this stuff all the time. And I understand that when you come from the world that you're in, it's hard to see this perspective because this is what you've heard over and over and over again. I really do get it, but I'm trying to help you. I really, really am. And I know that it might take some time, and if you need to think about it, that's cool. And if you need to ask questions about it to get clarification, that's cool. I'm not trying to be your enemy. I'm really not. I just really want you guys to start to understand this. Because once you understand this, you're going to see this in a new way, okay? The problem is going to change once you understand this.
Practiced as subjugation or oppression. Throughout American history, practices of freedom have included enslavement and exploitation alongside independence and emancipation. While Americans especially tend to hold freedom as their highest political value, their practices of freedom have often been tyrannical. The American Revolution, for example, a galvanizing enactment of collective freedom, was also at the exact same time a brutal and destructive process of indigenous dispossession that ravaged indigenous life worlds, something that Aziz showed us in his first book.
Chad, every time you hear the word white, I want you to, in your head, replace it with capitalist. Capitalist or capitalism, which means private property ownership. Just try it out, bro. Just try it out for this presentation. Every time they say white supremacy, whiteness, something like that, in your head, replace it with capitalist or private property owner and see if what they're saying makes more sense to you. Okay, you're already doing that? Okay, good. Thank you. Well, then, Albert, why do I have them on video from just the other day explicitly saying that whiteness meant capitalism? The video's on the channel, bro. Go back and watch it. I have them on video in one of their private trainings from the other day explicitly saying this.
Well into the 20th century, married men legally practiced freedom as domestic violence as part of their freedoms for privacy. The imperial destructions of the War on Terror was considered a war of freedom against fear, as George W. Bush insisted. All of these are ugly freedoms and shows us the way in which freedom has long been practiced as both non-domination and domination, as both unbound agency and forced bondage, as emancipation and constraint. Aziz's opening argument for this forum importantly argues that we need to reclaim freedom back from these forms of.
I am talking about their trainings. I'm talking about every single session they do. I have them on video saying this repeatedly. If you want to ignore evidence, that's your business, bro. But ignoring evidence to me, just because you don't like what the evidence says, seems really fucking retarded. Only morons ignore evidence, bro.
Ugliness to get back to its more both emancipating and non-dominating forms. Aziz asks us to reclaim left lineages of collective freedom for what he describes as a profound reimagining of how economic and political self-rule can spread in American life. And I think this is incredibly important. And I also think that we can look for freedoms in a somewhat different way. When we stop idealizing freedom, not only by looking at its ugliness on the right, but also sometimes the way in which we imagine it on the left, we can help to reckon not only with the domination that certain freedoms entail, but we can also discover other meaningful forms of freedom that might not track with our familiar expectations for inspiring forms of political agency, for liberatory modes of self-rule, or even for moral certainty in the way in which we organize our political and economic institutions. We often presume that freedom requires courageous subjects or inspiring collective actions, and ultimately that it manifests in some form of self-determination. This is the kind of freedoms that we find in some of the most important and central thinkers of our modern era, from Karl Marx to Emma Goldman to Frantz Fanon. But I think this can also leave out some of the more mundane and non-cathartic, but still worthwhile freedoms that are present in everyday life. So de-idealizing freedoms on the left can help to open space to explore freedom practices that we might not imagine or hope for as grand or upright, but might be minor and compromised, yet can still do generative work to help to fight for a world without exploitation and domination. De-idealizing freedom in the way in which I'm envisioning it is not trying to relinquish freedom as a practice or as an aspiration, and not even to relinquish it in some of the more galvanizing forms in which we'll be discussing today. But it is about relinquishing the expectation that our practices of freedom have to always be grand or honorable in order to do freedom work. De-idealizing freedom can help us to develop freedoms that might be far removed from things like self-mastery or brave resistance or triumphant emancipation, but can still do important work.
De-idealizing
In the
freedom.
forum for
God
Boston Review,
damn.
I shared an example of a pretty tawdry and mundane form of freedom that I think might otherwise symbol or signify a kind of embarrassing weakness, which is the social media circulation of the white boots DeSantis meme, which was derived from a picture taken of the governor wearing giant white water boots while he was examining hurricane damage. DeSantis staged this photo op in order to display himself as a heroic, masculinized protector and to align his vision with his freedom agenda, which is in many ways the ugliest of ugly freedoms, a freedom that is manifesting in anti-Black, anti-queer forms of political authoritarianism that wield state power like a weapon against weak and marginalized people.
If you have a question, you can just, oh, do you mean for that? Well, just put it in the chat. Just put it in the chat. We're monitoring. Don't worry about it. Guys, as a reminder, if you have questions about what's being said, especially if you are new here and this is maybe your first or second Socialism Saturday, please make sure to ask them in the chat. We will answer all questions as best we can.
And yet the circulation of this meme on social media undercut DeSantis' self-burnishing
they're not live right
performance
now,
of
so you
mastery.
can't troll them.
Right? On the one hand, it's obvious that nothing might signify freedom less than a juvenile meme that carries no political power and that reeks of slacktivism. Yet the meme undermined DeSantis' claims for authoritarianism with a shared political performance among aligned people that emphasized a kind of horizontal solidarity among a wide variety of disparate people who are together taking the low road to spoil DeSantis' performance. They crafted an ad hoc network that was built on their own kind of weakened agency and lowbrow behavior, oftentimes the very things that seem to signal a kind of unfreedom. But they used that to shift the national narrative of DeSantis's power and started the weakening that we're seeing circulating across the country today. The memes certainly worked alongside more iconic forms of freedom, like organized movement protests, social justice activism, and lawyers filing protests against some of DeSantis's unconstitutionality. But the meme gave people who may have felt they otherwise lacked power or a voice a way to work together, because it only works when it's together, a way to work together to challenge DeSantis's claims for freedom rule. This kind of easy circulation was readily available to college students shuttling between 3 jobs, overworked caregivers, dispirited Floridians, homebound people, frustrated teens, and scared queer and trans adolescents wondering what the future in Florida has for them. It was not galvanizing, and it did not overthrow DeSantis's freedom agenda. But de-idealizing freedom shows how this circulation was able to cultivate a low-key freedom under the radar of ideal visions, even when it is at the same time compromised, banal, and perhaps even discomforting to call this kind of small and minor act a performance of freedom. And yet I think to reckon with the complex legacy of freedom in the US is to see that there are many ways to enact freedom, some good, some bad, and some ugly. De-idealizing freedom does not reject transformative, inspiring actions, but aims to expand freedom's practice to include actions that might otherwise seem too ineffectual to build common worlds or too uninspiring.
So this is, I know you're not being serious, but I'm going to answer this question because it is actually like a real thing. Did all those books make her speak word vomit, or did she just go to college? People ask me all the time if they all understand the language that they're using, if they understand the coded language that they're using. Yes, they do, because they all learned to speak it in college. All of this language is spoken. This is really how they talk. This is really how they talk in real life. This is really how they talk in their private meetings. This is really how they talk in their private spaces. This is really how they talk when there's no cameras on them. And I know because I've gone undercover at their events. Like they are completely immersed in this language at all times. And so for them, they speak socialist as their first language. They are not speaking English, they're speaking socialist. So that's where they learn it, is in college. They're immersed in it.
Compared to more courageous and transformative actions. It can help us to identify and practice imperfect, muted, and unglamorous experiments that can still fight against exploitation and help us to craft new experiments in living free. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much. Mark?
Thanks for that, Livia. It was really, really insightful. So it was wonderful to be here with you all this evening. Really appreciate Boston Review and Haymarket for organizing this. So I love talking about freedom. It's our strongest, I think, most powerful, for better or worse, as we're going to talk about a lot this evening, political idea and identity. But as others have already laid out, the very idea of freedom is contested terrain. After all, as historian Eric Foner notes, whoever controls the idea of freedom really does control our master narrative, at least here in the United States. Of course, in other countries, other ideas resonate far more with the electorate. But here in the United States, it's really about freedom. But what we mean when we speak about freedom, and as Aziz really highlighted at the get-go, who it applies to, who gets to wield, the power and benefits of those
who gets to wield
free
freedom
at any given time, has always, really been a area of, extreme controversy. And this has been the case since the idea of America really took root. One thing that I really don't think is going to be controversial this evening is and something I would hope we would largely agree on, is that the right, however, today is completely winning the fight for the control over our master narrative here in the United States around freedom. the prominent political idea of freedom really has been owned by the political right for more than half a century, certainly for my entire lifetime. Now, what does the right mean when they speak of freedom? Often we think it's boiled down to this notion of negative freedom, which I borrow from the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, freedom from constraint or freedom from coercion, which is interesting because that's quite different than what we were speaking of earlier tonight, talking about freedom exercises, domination and coercion over others. But the kind of simple story that's often told is freedom is manifested through limited government, minimum taxation, and most importantly, access to quote unquote free markets. And here I think we see how powerful the idea of freedom is in developing and maintaining a capitalist state, which is it's not just about markets. It's about free markets.
Did he just say capitalist? Did he just say capitalist? I think he's the first. I think it said capital state, but I think he said capitalist. I think number 3 said capitalist. Let's go back, because he was talking about how this idea of freedom means these crazy things like the free markets. He said capitalism. He did. Congratulations to everyone who voted for number 3, which looks like 17% of you. Congratulations to the 17% of people who got that right. Let's go back. This is kind of like that time we heard that economics professor at Hofstra say that fascism is defined as free market capitalism. This guy was just like, those crazy right wingers, they think that freedom means no government and minimal taxes and free markets. Ha 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 ha. How silly are they to base freedom in capitalism? Let's watch.
Over others. But the kind of simple story that's often told is freedom is manifested through limited government, minimum taxation, and most importantly, access to quote unquote free markets. And here I think we see how powerful the idea of freedom is in developing and maintaining a capitalist state, which is it's not just about markets; it's about free markets. Of course, we know that this notion of free markets is a fictitious one, right? That a free market simply cannot exist.
That's not true.
But to be sure, capitalism, in particular, the flavor of capitalism we've largely experienced here in the United States, isn't about limited government. It isn't just about freedom from coercion. It's really about the domination and coercion of certain people within society, largely workers and those outside of the dominant group, which has historically been white men here in the United States, who then have that freedom.
Ding. That's why capitalism means whiteness. He just gave us the most beautiful explanation for why capitalism means whiteness. Did you guys catch it? What did he just say? That the hallmark of capitalism is that some group, in this case, white men, are going to dominate other groups. How do they dominate them? Through private property ownership and free markets. Let's watch that again.
Capitalism, in particular, the flavor of capitalism we've largely experienced here in the United States, isn't about limited government. It isn't just about freedom from coercion. It's really about the domination and coercion of certain people within society, largely workers and those outside of the dominant group, which has historically been white men here in the United States, who then have that freedom, that right to subjugate others. Now, this, of course, isn't the freedom I think that we're all hoping to work towards, which then brings the question of, do we want to reclaim freedom, or do we, kind of move past and think of freedom as an idea that has been sufficiently poisoned?
So let me do a follow-up question, because this is going to be a more advanced question. Why do these people believe that white male dominance is capitalism? Why, and think back to the idea of whiteness means capitalism. Why do these people believe, when they say white male dominance, what does that actually mean? How are the white men, quote unquote white men, dominating? How do the white men have the power to dominate? Think about the definition of capitalism. Think about the idea that whiteness means capitalism. How do white men have the power to dominate? Let's see some answers. Because white men, not exactly, not kind of, but not exactly. White men need to be resources need to be created. Not that's not it. This is true. Capitalism enforces the gender binary. Well, capitalism created the gender binary, not just enforced it. Capitalism created the gender binary by putting men in the workforce and women in the home. So that's definitely a part of it, Tim. White men created race to enforce capitalism. That's really good, Chad. That's very, very close. Patriarchy, ownership, by controlling resources. Guys, you're not giving me advanced level answers. I want advanced level answers. White men dominate through the oppressive force of capitalism. Don't do a throwaway like that, Renan. You know that's not what I'm looking for. We already talked about capitalism creating the gender binary. White men are dominating because they see women and others as property. Kind of, but not really the answer I'm looking for. It does go back to private property ownership, because the term white was created to benefit from capitalism during slavery. Yeah, kind of. White men are the benefactors of capitalism. White men are the owners of... Well, this is why whiteness means capitalism, because white men were the owners of the private property, and white was only created in response to slavery to keep the white men in power. So that's a pretty decent answer. Capitalism is male-dominated and oppresses women. Yup, they do believe that. Because white men were the owners of the private property. This is why whiteness means capitalism. Capitalism, which is private property ownership, created slavery in which white men were the owners of the private property. That ownership of private property created systemic racism, which is disparities in outcomes. Pretty decent answers, I think. Okay answers. Because white men are at the top of the hierarchy in capitalism and are exploiting others. These people hate hierarchies. They want everyone to be at the same level. What this is really saying is white men owned more resources than everyone else. Private property ownership means owning the resources. Okay? Because socialists want the government to own the means of production. So the enemy is going to be the white men who own all the private property, because they need to deprivatize all that private property to eliminate the hierarchies or the disparities. Chad, this can be your last warning. We do not use the term anti-white on this channel. Ever. No more. And you've already had this explained to you painstakingly, not only by me, but by many members of my chat. So no more fucking around. It's okay to joke. You will not use the term anti-white on my channel again. If you want to stay here, you're going to follow my fucking rules.
and one that is no longer able to be wielded by those seeking a more just and equitable and democratic society. But I think that despite the fact that the right really has owned the language war, I always think of this notion of building more enduring freedom. But we all know enduring freedom, of course, is code name for.
Hang on. I believe Chad is trying to understand too, which is why I'm spending so much time with him, and I appreciate him being here and being open-minded. But he's also testing boundaries, and there ain't going to be no more boundary testing. I'm not his mommy. No testing of fucking boundaries.
Devastating war in Afghanistan. Nevertheless, I think that we shouldn't give up on these narratives. I think it's crucial that we, that we think about freedom, a more robust version of freedom, as one where people are able to develop their capabilities, their passions, their relationships, and to be part of a healthy and thriving democratic society where people have a say not only in the political realm, but in the economic realm that covers their lives. I mean, it's fascinating to me how we just implicitly accept this firewall in our society where we talk about democracy and how it's allowed within politics. Of course, it's under fire increasingly, but we almost never talk about democracy when it comes to the workplace where we spend most of our waking hours. And so, thinking about a broader vision of freedom must entail thinking about how we deepen democracy, not only in the political realm, but in the economic realm as well. Now, I want to be careful here, and I don't think that reclaiming freedom is just about a political sparring a narrative sparring match. This isn't just about saying freedom more. This isn't just about stumping on the idea. I mean, President Biden launched his campaign re-election all on freedom, although it was very unclear what he meant when he wielded the term.
Oh, he doesn't even know what he means.
I think stories matter a tremendous amount, and that's the contribution that I tried to make for the Boston Review. That we need a story of progressive, inclusive, democratic freedom, so that people actually have a North Star to really understand what it is that we are working towards. And I think that more than anything is something that I've been.
What does number 3 mean when he says progressive, inclusive, democratic freedom? He says, we need a vision of more progressive, inclusive, democratic freedom. What does that mean? Progressive, inclusive, democratic freedom means socialism. Socialism, it means equity, which means socialism. It means socialism. It means Marxism. It means socialism. Progressive, inclusive, democratic freedom means equity, socialism, equity. Everyone being equal, but what does that mean? That means equity. Socialism, he means an equitable society. Equity always means Marxism, guys. Every time you hear the term equity, it means Marxism. We got S. Stinger over on Rumble says socialist. NYNCA on Rumble says communists. Also says communists are a cult. Yep, true enough. The Bulldog on Rumble says socialism. Good job, guys.
Craving for the left to develop in my own lifetime is something that I think is starting to coalesce, but really that's a more recent development and something I think that has largely been missing. Looking to kind of the massive political changes and kind of the development of an actual, more progressive political force here in the United States over the past 8 or so years, I think we see individuals really grappling with what it is that they're working towards. And there's lots of ideas, but the problem is a laundry list doesn't convince people. We need a coherent, I think well-articulated idea of what we mean by freedom. And here too, I think it's really important that we ground that in history. I think often we feel like we're constantly reinventing the wheel, but when it comes to freedom, we don't need to. Indeed, I think it's crucial that we kind of uncover and talk more about the long fight for freedom here in the United States. It's something that, you know, most school
The
children
long
today
struggle for
barely learn
freedom
about when we think
against
about whether it be the
capitalism.
more radical founders
Radical means
or the
socialist.
radical Republicans, or, you know, Roosevelt's Four Freedoms and his Economic Bill of Rights, to the, you know, to the fight in the civil rights movement that expanded far beyond civil and political rights, but really encompassed, you know, a much more radical reorganization of society around democratic control, to a degree, of the economic means of production and economic rights as a cornerstone to people being actually free. So the people who have at least been really influential in my thinking here are folks like A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, who led in the development of this idea called a freedom budget, something that has, you know, really fallen by the wayside, unfortunately, and came into being during the height of the Vietnam War, which I think set it on challenging terrain from the get-go. But thinking about these ideas again and realizing that we aren't struggling for freedom on completely new terrain here, but that we are building on.
Hang on. Elena, this is ridiculous. This is, you're a conservative. I know you're a conservative because only a conservative would say such a ridiculous thing. I want people in the chat, and I don't mean any offense by this, Elena, but I want you to learn. I want people in the chat to tell me why what Elena is saying is ridiculous. I'm hoping that the fact that these people are completely joyless will mean their ideas don't continue to pan out. Why is this a ridiculous idea? This is something only a conservative would say. Why is this a ridiculous idea? Because joy doesn't mean winning. They already control every institution. Because they're already winning. Elena, you're a conservative that thinks they're a libertarian. I promise you, only a conservative would say something so ridiculous as what you just said. Their ideas have already infiltrated the institutions. They own institutional power. Their ideas are panning out because they've taken over the institutions, are enforcing their ideals, because they have children, families and children. Their ideas are panning out every day because socialists are winning and conservatives are lying to themselves. I really don't mean any offense, Elena, but like saying something like that in my chat is like, it's ridiculous and it needs to be corrected. I'm sorry. It's already panning out. They own the schools. They're the ones winning. The far left has complete control over all the institutions in America, and the right doesn't even know it. They hold institutional powers. They are militant in their pursuit of their goals. You don't need to have joy if you are militant in the pursuit of your goals. Their ideas diffuse into culture because they control the institutions of higher learning. They've already taken over the institutions and are winning. It doesn't matter if these people are joyless. They are the hands controlling all the institutions. They don't give a flying fuck what you think about them and their lack of joy. They are winning. Activism doesn't require joy. Newsflash, it's panning out. They ruminate and struggle, and it's working. I don't mean to be a bitch, but like, we really need to dispense with this notion that because these people are miserable people, that means they're going to lose. They are winning. They are winning massively. People need to stop lying to themselves about this. Ridiculous. Ridiculous notions. And Republicans are not joyful either. Exactly. Republicans are the very opposite of joy.
You know, the work of people who have been fighting for this more holistic, inclusive, and democratic vision of freedom for centuries, and importantly, here in the United States, as a way to counter the right's claim on their kind of monopoly, so to say, on freedom and their ability to link it throughout American history. And I do want to highlight that, you know, I've really took the American approach to thinking about freedom, which of course has its own shortcomings. And I think Aziz really highlighted that nicely, and how important it is that we contend more with the role of American empire. And even if we were to, provide for everybody living in the United States, and in a far different manner than we do today, if that's based on the continuation of American empire, that is not actually working towards the kind of true that we should be seeking. So this is about going on the offense. It's about developing that North Star, a set of ideas, and as a policy economist, frankly, a set of policies to actually be able to talk to people about what freedom looks like. It's not just about a slogan, but it is about thinking about how full employment, or living wages, or proper parental leave, or fewer working hours, providing people with more free time, expands that we need to contend with far more. I think it's something that we really struggle with here today, and something that I hope we can talk more about moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Will.
God damn this guy's microphone.
Great. Thank you, Aziz, for moderating all of this. So I was immensely pleased to be asked to be part of this issue. I've long been of the opinion that the left should build its house on the rock of freedom. But between the time that we were drafting our contributions and when the issue actually came out, I think the question of what freedom could or should mean on the left gained a new urgency. Since October 7th,
here we go.
Palestinian freedom,
here we go.
Especially the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," have been called terroristic, anti-Semitic.
By the way, can we talk about how conservative fucking retards shot their free speech arguments in the foot when they wanted to ban saying "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free"? You're telling me that conservatives for years and years and years and years and years were like, free speech, we're the defenders of free speech, we're the ones that believe in individual liberties, we're the ones that are defending free speech. And then the minute that this thing starts between Israel and Palestine, all of a sudden, all of the conservative fucking shills on the internet were like, we need to ban saying "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." They can go fuck themselves. They have undercut every single argument that they made for years about speech. Every single one. Because words are not violence, and words you don't like doesn't mean they're more violence than words that you do like. Just because you don't like someone's political position, just because you want to be a fucking shill for Israel, does not mean that someone saying "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" is a call for fucking terrorism. It was one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in my life. And to be honest, like, Dave Rubin can go fuck himself. Douglas Murray can go fuck himself. Gad Saad can go fuck himself. Every single fucking shill that's trying to say that people should be punished for saying words that they don't like. Ben Shapiro can go fuck himself. All of them. All of them. We have all learned a lot in the past several months about who actually believes in free speech and who doesn't. And none of these people, and that includes Republican Congress people who got all up in arms like, how dare you not ban this language? Excuse me, you assholes were arguing about free speech on college campuses up until like 5 minutes ago. And now you want to ban speech you don't like on college campuses? Did you ever believe it? No. The answer is they did never believe it. They never believed it. They made millions and millions of dollars convincing people that they were the defenders of individual liberties and free speech. And then they showed their true colors the very minute that fucking Israel was involved. I never gave two shits about Israel in my life up until all of the conservative shills started tripping all over themselves to put the needs of fucking Israel or the wants of Israel or the desires of Israel over what's going on here. They have been more like, they care more about what's going on in Israel than they do about the stuff that I cover. They care more about what's going on in Israel than they do about what's going on in colleges. They care more about what's going on in Israel than they ever cared about free speech and individual liberties. They never believed anything that they sold to us to make millions of dollars, sell books, do their shows, etc., 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 etc. They can all go fuck themselves. That's how I feel about it.
And even genocidal. Articulating and forcefully defending the left.
Hang on. Sith over on Rumble put it really well. Wanting Israel to fuck off out of American politics is not anti-Semitic. Because according to Ben Shapiro, Israel could take care of itself. They didn't need our help in the first place. Oh, wait, we're sending them tens of billions of dollars. In addition to the $3 billion that we send them every single goddamn year. Anyway, we can, like, this is where we can find common ground with the socialists. Socialists think conservatives should go fuck themselves. We think conservatives should go fuck themselves. Not the good conservatives, you know who I'm talking about. But all of the ones that are like, we need to censor from the Israel to the sea, Palestine should be free. Those conservatives can go fuck themselves.
Of freedom in this moment, I think, is a matter of principle and an emergency measure of self-defense. Both parties in the US and most major parties right across the North Atlantic have lined up behind Israel's devastation of Gaza, which has slaughtered over 30,000 Palestinians. And to say then, as Jefferson Cowie does in this issue,
totally not
a
genocide though. Totes not. No, definitely not.
That we should forget freedom and argue instead for democracy, I think is fundamentally misconceived. The oppressed, the dominated, the invaded, terrorized, and enslaved, they call themselves for freedom. And if we don't defend, amplify, and act in solidarity with those calls, what are we even doing? I think the problems and the reasonable disagreements arise when we try to spell out what this freedom we are calling for actually looks like. And here I want to push 3 points in particular. First, I think we need to separate questions of the extension of freedom from questions of its intention. And what I mean by that is that I think we need to separate questions about who should be free and to what, or for what they should be free to do, from questions of what it means to be free. I think a great deal of the disagreement between the right and the left about freedom is not actually about what freedom means, but it's about who should be free to do what. So, of course, the right thinks only some people should be free. And of course, the left thinks freedom should be enjoyed universally.
Well, that's not true.
I think the freedom to dominate is not necessarily a different kind or concept of freedom from the freedom that we all want. It's just an exclusive freedom, a freedom for some and at the expense of others. So I think I disagree. I think I'm disagreeing with Aziz here to a certain extent, at least. The American right does not have an exclusive vision of freedom as opposed to the solidaristic notion that we have on the left. Solidarity and collective action among traditional or new elites is essential to the right's vision of freedom. exclusion and solidarity go together and feed into one another on the right. And that's precisely why I think we on the left should actually not think of democracy as collective self-rule. Collective self-rule makes the question of who's in and who's out, the inclusion and exclusion from the demos, into the central political question, right? How do you define the self that is doing the ruling? So that's my first thought. Second, and this means turning to the question of what freedom means or its intention. I think freedom is or should be a power concept, right? Not oftentimes you hear of it. There's a famous articulation by Charles Taylor that differentiates between opportunity concepts of freedom and exercise concepts of freedom. And I think we should differentiate it from both of those and say it's a power concept. And I think this is where I disagree with most everyone in the issue, except actually maybe Mark. I think freedom pertains to what we can do. Libby argues in part, for example, that freedom inheres in more than exemplary or profound action. And I want to respond that I don't think freedom inheres in action at all. Actions are free only because we could also have done something else. Actions, including the banal and non-cathartic actions that Libby wants to valorize, might create or sustain freedom by augmenting or preserving our power to act with other people. But I think we easily fall into a sort of category error when we think of freedom as a set of practices, or collapse the distinction between being free and exercising that freedom in some way or another. And finally, seeing freedom as a species of power, I think, matters politically because it shows us why labor unions, state provision of non-commodity goods, and mundane opportunities to communicate spoofs and jokes with one another are also central to the left's vision of freedom and the struggle for a freer world. Unions are not institutions of freedom because they are for or for collective self-determination, but because they are counterpowers. They give workers a power of numbers and organization to counter the money power of capitalism. Guaranteed access to food, shelter, and money gives people the power to evade and escape the thumb of husbands, bosses, landlords, and other local would-be tyrants. Opportunities to poke fun at our governors give us the power to find communities of people who will support and protect us. Building institutions of freedom means building power among and for the least powerful. Power that can check and balance existing concentrations of power and dismantle domination. And I think today there's just no more urgent project on the left than building institutions of freedom for Palestine, building power among and for Palestinians so as to check and balance the overwhelming power of the Israeli-American alliance. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Will. So we thought that we would have some time to just talk amongst ourselves. And, you know, rather than continuing as moderator here, I have questions for all of you, but maybe somebody else can jump in and pose a question, and we can do go in a circle and have a chance to kind of discuss various themes that have come up. And then around 8 or so, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Anybody want to jump in?
Sorry, I'm happy to start.
Go ahead.
And thanks you all for your comments, and I hope that we'll be able to continue thinking through there at their nexus. You know, one of the things I really love about what you are all saying is the way in which you're grounding freedom in really concrete material shifts, and at the same time thinking about these questions of narrative, because I think sometimes when we think about certain aspects of leftist scholarship and the ending demand for freedom is to imagine otherwise or to act otherwise without that kind of actual specificity of what do we mean, what are institutions, what are policies, what are programs. You know, I think that is countering a trend, and I find it really important. And my question is about how do we ensure all of the three freedoms in that we are discussing or imagining or thinking about, these reclamations, are not themselves ultimately brutal or unintentionally exploitative or end up recapitulating some of the forms of violence that we intend for them to challenge. So when we think about these kind of particular economic policies or reimagining institutions, both at a global level, at a transnational level, at a local level, what are the ways that we do that that don't end up doing so much of the work that we've seen of freedom throughout U.S. history and throughout the history of freedom practices? Which is
Molly's bringing up like a good point. I seem to be hearing less folks and y'all compared to the talks on queer stuff from earlier in the week. There is a reason for that, Maldy. Do you want to guess what it is? Does anyone want to guess what it is? Why would we be hearing less references to, folks and y'all than we do from the queer Marxists? Why might that be? There's always a reason for these things. There are no coincidences. There's always a reason, because these are not queer Marxists. These people would say comrade for sure. It's not that they don't care. These are professors. No, it's not that they're not pure, but not really. So we hear folks and y'all from the people who are primarily focused on abolishing the gender binary, which are the queer Marxists, but these people are not primarily focused on abolishing the gender binary. Yeah. So this is not a stream about queer Marxism. It's just a matter of focus. It's not that they're not Marxists. It's not that they don't believe that stuff. We know they do believe that stuff because they were talking earlier in the presentation about how capitalism created the gender binary. They understand queer liberation, but it's kind of like these are the Marxists where their knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep, whereas the queer Marxists, their knowledge is a mile deep, focused specifically on the gender stuff. So it's like, it's two different brands of it. Does that make sense? You will hear different language from different types of Marxists, and it can help you kind of like assess just by listening to them what kind of brand of Marxists they are. Well, this is true enough. They're on different ends of the same boat. Exactly. They're working together. They're on the same boat, but they're doing different things. Yeah. Basically, hang on, Stony Baloney. Basically, like, how can we make freedom gay and retarded? Exactly. Exactly.
About opening up some possibilities and for closing others in ways that are incredibly violent, that are not only about excluding certain people, but exploiting them or their bodies or their labor or their land for new practices of freedom.
I'd be happy to jump in and throw in my 2 cents. I mean, I guess my opinion is that, like, and I think this is the easy answer. Maybe it's a bit of a cheat, but I don't think the concept of freedom is going to get us that. The ideal of freedom itself isn't going to get us that, because I think, and this is what Aziz's work pays attention to. This is what your work pays attention to. Like, freedom as an ideal doesn't itself differentiate between a freedom that we can all share and a freedom that is my freedom or my group's freedom, and that allows me, that I secure by oppressing you, and that you aren't allowed to have. So I guess I think we're asking too much of the concept if we want the concept itself to do that extensional work, like that, a commitment to a sort of universality, a commitment to the rights of everyone, a commitment to everyone's claim on freedom. I think that's a separate commitment from the commitment to freedom as such.
The thing that I would just add, I don't know if this is consistent or maybe intention, is that, so my own view about it is that So I understand freedom as necessarily emerging from concrete historical practices, like actual material conditions, and in particular as tied very deeply to experiences of domination. So, slavery is a foundational example, but colonialism as another foundational example, and that communities that find themselves experiencing oppression then, conceive of their own emancipation as the elimination.
They believe that a socialist society or a Marxist society is the only society in which everyone will experience freedom. And they believe that when the political right is talking about freedom, they don't mean freedom for everyone. They just mean freedom for them, essentially. And the right is about to completely reinforce this concept by going on a campaign against Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day, which will be great for all of us. This is why, guys, this very idea, you guys know those signs that are like, queers for Palestine, or like, and stuff like that, or like, we're not free until everyone's free. Like Palestinian liberation means queer liberation means Palestinian liberation. You guys know how the right is totally confused about the queers for Palestine thing? Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Can you just confirm in the chat that you know what I'm talking about, so I'm not just making things up? So the reason the queers for Palestine stuff, the like, we're not free until Palestinians are free sort of thing, that's because these people only believe that we can be free in a socialist world. This is why they're supporting the Palestinians. This is why they're supporting Hamas. They perceive the revolt against Israel to be a literal revolution against capitalism. That's what we're talking about. They don't care about the Palestinians. They don't give a flying flip about the Palestinians. They see it as this is their revolution. We can't be free until capitalism is overthrown. And it doesn't matter if Muslims don't like the gays. That is secondary. That is not what they're interested in right now. The reason you see queers for Palestine is because they believe that the Palestinians are overthrowing capitalism, which will make everyone free.
Of these overwhelming forms of domination and control. Here's maybe where I have a slight difference with Will, and I'd be curious what he thinks. I think inevitably, as a political practice, when communities are contesting extreme forms of oppression and domination, they conceive not just of a freedom from, but of a positive vision of what society would in fact look like.
They do know this. They don't care. I swear to God, they do know this. They are very well aware that Muslims don't like gay people. They just don't care because the war against capitalism is the greater good. And they perceive Hamas to be in a war against capitalism. Can we please, for the love of God, stop underestimating these people? They do everything for a reason. It's not they are not ignorant. They are not stupid. This is why we don't spend any time debunking them, because most of the time the debunking that the conservatives do is just like, it's retarded. It doesn't even make any sense. They probably think that once Israel is defeated, the revolution will continue and Hamas will love the queers. Yeah, they do think that. Listen, guys, this is reality. There is a person that I follow on Instagram that goes by, I think it's Rain Dove. Hang on, let me look it up. This is like a non-binary person, Rain Dove. Has anyone ever heard of Rain Dove? Rain Dove is a non-binary like activist that like really messes around with gender and all that. Like is a woman but looks really like a man and does like all these like yeah. Rain Dove, Raindove. Rain Dove is obviously queer. Obviously. Rain Dove has been documenting on their Instagram, spending a lot of time in Gaza, talking about queer activism in Gaza. They're in fucking Gaza. And you know what they're finding is that people don't actually hate them as much as like conservatives like think they do. Do you want to know why that is? Because half of the population of Gaza is under the age of 18. So not everyone in Gaza actually wants to throw them off a roof. I hope everyone understands this. That's just reality. Like, I've seen the video. I've literally seen the video. It's on their Instagram. But the bigger picture is they view this as a revolution against the capitalist oppressor, and they believe that once they get rid of capitalism, then everyone is going to have everything they need, and everyone is going to be accepted for like who they are.
Without those conditions, like what in fact emancipation looks like, even if it's only sketched, but that the positive and the negative are necessarily bound together. And in conceiving of the positive, the most emancipatory forms of these projects imagine that such liberation is going to be equal, effective, universal. And they're pressing for a society that is fundamentally different. This is the long Black freedom struggle. This is the idea of the freedom budget in the 1960s, the Poor People's Campaign. This is anti-colonial liberation across, large swaths of the world, the global South that we see ongoing to this very day.
Global South, Southern Hemisphere.
Inevitably, the actual political condition of, undermining past forms of control and creating something new doesn't in fact produce a universal condition of liberation. It's always still knitted together, freedom and domination. And that means that if there is this dialectic, that dialectic, in my view, is a permanent part of just being a person thrown into the world under political conditions. And so every new mode of, of liberation, alternative political possibility that emerges in the world still has embedded within it forms of domination that have to be contested. This is also why, my work emphasizes freedom as self-rule, but I only see that as one way of conceiving of the politics of freedom. It happens to be a very powerful one because of the concrete experiences of domination that have existed in American society. But one could imagine different circumstances in which new forms of control, subordination, corrosion actually require a very different kind of freedom language. And it's why I tend to be very, very suspicious of political arguments that say, because of freedom's, other side, it all has to be rejected. Because that's just essentially ignoring that politics inevitably is about the stitching together of the free and the unfree. And it's also tied to, I think, Will's really powerful point, which is that also then, in a weird way, in an effort to kind of honor those that are oppressed, rejects the very language that people that face oppression are using in the here and now or in the recent past to articulate the conditions for their own emancipation.
So I think this is, a really rich conversation, and there's so many things I want to pick up on. But to kind of connect it back to Libby's initial question, I think, is to, for me, contemplate more what freedom looks like beyond, U.S. borders for a moment here. And in particular, though, I'm thinking about this from the economic realm, actually, because to free up people from domination is not to free them to have access to the means of production necessary to lead a decent quality of life in the 21st century, right?
What?
I mean, we could foresee, breaking the U.S.-Israeli alliance and actually
just because you're free from domination does not mean you're going to have access to the means of production. Let's just not get it twisted. I want to listen to that again.
On U.S. borders for a moment here. And in particular, though, I'm thinking about this from the economic realm, actually, because to free up people from domination is not to free them to have access to the means of production necessary to lead a decent quality of life in the 21st century, right? I mean, we could foresee, breaking the U.S.-Israeli alliance and actually allowing, and assisting in the freedom of the Palestinian people, but that's not necessarily to say that they will have economic access to sufficiently bring them into the 21st century. So I think it's a really fascinating question to contemplate. What do we mean by kind of a vision and pathway towards an international solidarity around this notion of freedom? And how would we actually act on a global scale? And maybe I'm getting too into the policy weeds here, but for me, it's actually a really fascinating question, in particular, say, around the green energy transition. Really what we're seeing is kind of continued extractivism from countries like the United States and much of Europe. Why did we pass something like the Inflation Reduction Act? It's to ensure that we get ahead of other countries and then can continue to extract and dominate. It's not to actually transition an economy and actually, help us have a more sustainable future. And so I think that, is our freedom, is our economic freedom in particular rooted in the continued domination of, in particular, the third world, or are there ways that we can actually build that solidarity and, that broader and, international freedom that could be more emancipatory beyond the nation state?
So I do actually have a thought on this, but I'd love for Libby to jump back in and maybe give a stab at answering your own really wonderful question, or any the question that you raised, or any of the reflections that the three of us sort of threw back at you.
Isn't the questioner's prerogative that we don't have to answer our question? The reason that I ask is, not because I have a pat answer in any way, but because I see this as one of the most pressing questions in everything that we are always talking about, right? So how can we envision ways of...
Hang on, Adrian's got a question. How do queer Marxists believe capitalism is to blame for homophobia? Because homophobia is created... Okay, so you're answering your own question. Because homophobia is created by powerful, oppressive structures created by oppressive power structures created by the rich and powerful. Kind of, but not really. Kind of, but not really. I want to open it up to people in the chat. Let's do this as a pop quiz. Why do queer Marxists believe capitalism is to blame for homophobia? I mean, you're on the right track. I'm not saying your answer is totally wrong or anything. It's definitely on the right track, but there's more, I want to go just a layer or two deep, because this is still a pretty vague answer. We do not rely on scholarly articles here. We only rely on what people are saying and doing in the real world. So I'm very happy that you found an article, but that's not what we're doing here. So let's see what people say. Heterosexuality was invented by capitalism. Well, actually, they do say that prior to capitalism, there were more queer and non-binary people. So you may be onto something there. The target is the family, so homophobia is preserving the nuclear family. Not really. I understand why you went in that direction. The gender binary is heteronormative. That's more of what I was looking for. Because capitalism is the system that is upheld by the nuclear family, which means men and women must reproduce the worker. There we go. Now we're getting into social reproduction theory. The nuclear family is necessary to maintain capitalism. Now, what do they call it when gay people get married and have a nuclear family? What do they call that? Capitalism is a totaling culture that creates all the structures of society. Well, it's a little bit vague. Let's see. Let's see. Normalcy is considered private property. Close. Normativity. Normativity is the word you're looking for. Homophobia does reaffirm the gender binary and the nuclear family. Yep. Capitalism, like, nope, this is not correct. This is not correct. Gay people can have kids too, Liz. Come on. Not correct. You're literally not blocked, but whine in my chat and you might be blocked. You are timed out for being a dick. If you want to continue to be a dick in my chat, then I'm happy to ban you permanently and you won't be able to participate. It's entirely up to you. When gay people get married and have a nuclear family, that is called homonormativity. 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 Homonormative. Homonormative. They don't like that either. So queer Marxists do not like gay people that settle down and have a nuclear family. Why? Because the target is always the nuclear family. The target of queer Marxists is always the nuclear family. Perhaps, Jolene, you should sit your ass down and listen before piping in, and you might learn what this is. Another conservative thinks we're all socialists. Gay people with kids still reproduce capitalism because of homonormativity. Exactly.
Global solidarity around free Palestine that don't end up re-exstantiating new forms of exploitation or brutality. You know, what does that look like? How can we imagine, like, you know, feel free to answer, right, if Will has it, you know, how do we think about, you know, the ways of imagining kind of true economic equality that end up actually providing everybody, you know, what they need to live in this world? You know, what does that look like and how do we do it? And all of these questions, I think, you know, I think more than the answers to them is that I get worried when we answer them with a deep sense of our own moral purity and certitude about what we know what freedom is and what it will look like for others or even for ourselves and how we envision it. Because I worry sometimes that this sense that our own visions are so morally pure that we don't end up seeing the remainders or the losses or the excesses that end up contributing to them. So, you know, when I was thinking in Ugly Freedoms, part of my claim was that there is no freedom that is itself ever ideal or pure. And that so often, I mean, you know, maybe if we think about it through Aziz's terms, if every form of freedom still carries either seeds or remainders of previous or extant forms of domination, how are we constantly making sure that, while I do see freedom as a practice and as an exercise, not as a noun, but as a verb, how do we make sure that every action and practice is something where we are trying to be attentive to what some of those actions and effects might be, and making sure that they are always about making sure that liberation is actually ongoing for more and more people, that equality is ongoing for more and more people, rather than not attending to that or being so sure about our own moral clarity that we don't attend to those forms of domination that might be present in any act. But Will is going to answer it, so great.
Does anybody want to jump in on this point that Mark raised, which is,
so 40 minutes left,
connected to what we've been discussing about how to think of the international? If the international has to be incorporated in our domestic understandings of what freedom means, and that if this moment, you know, with what's happening in Gaza is such a powerful example of it, then how do we actually do that effectively as something that is a genuine way of life that connects us to people elsewhere? Any thoughts on this?
Do you guys notice how Will, number 2, derailed this entire discussion by bringing up Palestine? Like, this was not supposed to be a discussion that was about Israel and Palestine. And then Will brought it up and he wore his scarf to send an extra virtue signal. And now the entire discussion has become about centering Israel and Palestine, specifically Palestinians, obviously. Why is that? Why was Will able to derail the entire discussion to center Palestine as the focus of what they're talking about when that was not the original topic of discussion. And none of these people have pushed back on him. The moderator hasn't pushed back on him to say, we're not talking about Palestine right now. We're talking about freedom in the United States. Why was Will able to do that? Well, yeah, Jane, I would say he definitely does. I think all of them have critical consciousness, but why was he able to derail the entire discussion? This, by the way, if you guys remember back to that 2019 Democratic Socialists of America meeting when like half of the time was spent determining the order in line, it's kind of the same thing. He wants a struggle session. I mean, kind of. Well, why though? Why did no one dare challenge him? Aha, Stevie's in with the correct answer, because right now, to these people, Palestinians are the most oppressed of all group. And because Palestinians are the most oppressed of all group, if you, excuse me, if you bring them up and they're the most oppressed, everything has to become about them, right? Because they're the most oppressed, because equity. Because equity demands we don't prioritize the U.S. over the Palestinians. It's not just the brown people in this case. It is specifically the Palestinians. Exactly, Westcott. Palestinians are higher in the oppression scoring system. Right now, Palestinians are right up with like black trans women in the oppression scoring system. And if anyone disagrees with that, if anyone says maybe we don't talk about the Palestinians right now, then they are exerting their privilege over the Palestinians, which is not allowed if they're going to be part of their collective group. Does everyone understand? Because right now, and the oppression list is fluid. The oppression list changes all the time. But right now, Palestinians are at the very effing top of the oppression hierarchy. Or they call it progressive stack. I call it the woke oppression hierarchy.
I mean, my thoughts are just, I mean, I wanted to jump on Mark's question because I wanted to like just put a sharper point on it in some sense, because I actually think it's an incredibly sticky question. So, and I was thinking about, there was an interview with Motaz Saisi, the Palestinian photojournalist, on Mehdi Hassan's final show. And Motaz said, he said something like, don't call yourself a free person if you can't stop a genocide that's still ongoing. And I think his point was that if the Israeli government can carry out a genocide in Gaza with the blessing and support of the US, of Britain, of the EU,
True.
And the people represented by those governments cannot stop it, then no one is free. Right? No one can stop those governments from doing whatever they want, apparently, right? And I think that harmonizes in a sense with, like, I've certainly been feeling fairly powerless lately. So, and to me, the point of that is to think, well, so on the one hand, I do wonder, like Libby, like when we're confronted with the sort of scale and scope of mobilized state power like this, like, are you able to keep faith with those
Thanks
smaller
for stopping by,
freedoms?
Kraken Eggs. We appreciate it. Come back
right,
sometime.
like, or do they seem like they're rightly thought of as ineffectual in this sort of context? But it also makes me wonder, like, Aziz, about your own, like, sort of framing of the issue in terms of U.S. empire, because it seems like something new is kind of happening, which is that I know Biden has made some proposals and some noise in this direction, but he's not running a sort of imperial Keynesian program of, like, buying quiescence at home with adventures abroad. but rather like something like what you talk about as settler freedom is playing out on a global level, right? In the sense that like Israel seems to be playing the role of the frontier settler, right? Destroying the savages while demanding and getting ample support and no restrictions from the government back in Washington, right? Like, so that's not, I feel like that takes your model of settler freedom, but globalizes it. And so I like, there's something like your imperial framework seems like it still locates the dynamics of freedom within a domestic sphere, even if they're impacted by imperial things of policy abroad. And I just don't, I'm honestly flummoxed by how to think through the present.
Yeah, so can I jump in on sort of what part of what I'm thinking? So here is, you know, and I think you're right to note that this was a volume that was conceived in the summer and at an earlier moment in time. And here's sort of what I was thinking about where the US had reached with the politics of empire. So simply put,
all right, fair enough.
Both during the high tide of settler colonization, and then let's say in the post-World War II period, we have moments in which American expansion in different ways actually serves internal economic and, let's say, political independence, well-being for a substantial part of the population. Accessing land, a condition for something like freedom as self-rule for large numbers of Americans in the 19th century. In the mid-20th century, the US's dominant global position, dollar hegemony, the reconstruction of foreign states and markets is the condition in many ways for what you were talking about, you know, like wartime Keynesianism, but American largesse. And that this is something that I think people on the liberal left have to kind of engage with, which is the extent to which the structuring terms for domestic well-being have been these external projects, and how those external projects then have these really profound negative effects on what freedom means, on the idea that, you know, freedom is something that's always under threat from outsiders, that is racialized, that is zero-sum, that requires a kind of belligerence. I'd say the thing that was really interesting about the last decade and the wars, really starting with the war on terror, 9/11, is that the US had basically reached a point of exhaustion where it's still essentially asserting a huge amount of power globally, and there's wealth that's being accumulated by corporate actors. But the classic story, in a way, of both the mid-19th and the mid-20th century is just less effective. And it's part of how Trump and companies turn on America.
I got a super chat from MB. Thank you, MB, for the super chat. We also have to remember that Palestine is part of the global south, so they have to add to the oppression hierarchy. Are they though? Are they in the southern hemisphere? So and they may be, I don't know. I mean, this is just a geography question. I don't know the geography of that region very well. When they're saying the global south, they mean like South America and like Africa and like things like it. I don't think they're part of the southern hemisphere. So no, well, they said the global south in general, but it wasn't in relation to Palestine specifically. Yeah, I mean, in terms of oppression, yeah, but so they're not technically part of the global south, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be oppressed still. Yeah, I didn't think they were in the southern hemisphere. When they say the global south, guys, they mean the southern hemisphere. But only for brown people. Not for white people. They mean third world countries, essentially. So maybe in that respect, they would be considered part of the global south. I'm not sure. That's a good question. We should find a socialist and ask them if they consider Palestine to be part of the global south. Palestine is not typically considered part of the global south. The terms global north and global south are often used to describe socioeconomic and geopolitical. Oh. See, I always thought it was the southern hemisphere. Where'd you get that, bot? Global south just means third world. It means oppressed. Doesn't mean like Australia. Australia and New Zealand are not the global south. Yeah, we should ask Sophie about this. Sophie, can you inform us what the Global South mean? Is Palestine part of the Global South? Someone DM Sophie and ask her. I can't. Can someone DM Sophie and ask her very nicely if Palestine's part of the Global South?
American sort of like globalism is part of a story about the fact that these projects have not been successful for those that are supposed to be the insiders. That doesn't mean that Trump and company are rejecting belligerence, militarism, racism, but there's a breakdown in a kind of expansionist ethic for this reason. I read Biden's politics as actually tied
Sophie, this is a serious question, okay?
Way in the US in the mid-20th century, which is a society that was a settler society, reconceives itself as a universal society, open to all, and indeed its interests are equivalent to the world's interests, is the first truly non-imperial country. And World War II, I think, plays a really profound role in that cultural reconstruction. The politics of World War II combined with the civil rights movement. And for somebody like Biden, he understands his support as linking the two. He does not see his support. This is like the internal psychology of a certain kind of American liberalism. He does not see his support as inconsistent with his support for mainstream civil rights projects. And what we're seeing instead, I think, before our eyes is a fundamental, let's say, fracture inconsistency between the self-mythology of America in the 20th century, World War II, the Cold War, and the practical effects of what American power is doing.
Check in with Charlie
in
Kirk
ways
Turning
that I
Point.
think speak to a broader kind of fracture or breakdown in all of the legitimating narratives of American power, both for people within the country, that the US is actually getting something positive from it, and for folks globally. And it's why, I think one of the hard things that we'll have to kind of engage with is we're talking about freedom, but if we're thinking about freedom globally, there's a real question about the extent to which it's going to be within the US that we'll see these transformative projects, or if it's going to be elsewhere. But if it's going to be elsewhere, then it's tied to the very same problems we've seen in the US, namely that the institutions, the practical institutions that make an emancipatory account of freedom something that's real and livable for most people, the labor unions, the Black churches that existed in the 50s and 60s, you name it, those have been systematically desiccated. And so they have to be revived for a strong freedom narrative at home. But that's the same story you'd say abroad, both about unions, but more generally about the broader kind of third world internationalist tradition. It's been desiccated in ways that mean that those institutions can't claim the kind of moral authority that they should be able to. This is part of what Libby is indicating. Anyway, sorry, I went off, but those are just my reflections on that. Anybody else want to jump in on this, on the question of internationalism, on the difficulty of defending freedom in a context in which it's tied to forms of domination? Or Libby, did you want to talk a little bit about, before we open it up to questions, your the question?
What they believe is that freedom can never exist under capitalism because capitalism is an inherent form of domination. Does everyone understand that? Capitalism, because it is unequal distribution of resources, is an inherent form of domination by people who have more private property than others over people who have less private property. Therefore, you can never be free under capitalism because it is inherently dominative.
Question about to what extent are non-ideal freedoms enough at a time when it feels like the problems are so massive? We can talk internationally or even just like domestically, or climate change. Well, non-ideal freedoms from global ecological disaster. Do we actually need to think in utopian terms about genuinely romantic alternatives and possibilities?
I mean, I think there are many ways in which these kind of smaller freedoms become even more important than ever, because there's so many ways in which, when we look at the world and the problems seem so insurmountable and individuals seem to not be able to change their own lives, let alone stop, massive genocide, and things feel so horrible. I think when we only imagine that freedom happens at these large transformative scales, then in many ways it seems to block out all the work of what ordinary people can actually do to change their world. When we tell stories about freedom where it's about heroes who lead the people, who form movements and people follow them, I think, especially in a day and age when everybody is exhausted and precarious and hyperextended and terrified, that imagining that freedom is always in these large scale heroic moments ends up being a deep form of disempowerment, which is not to say that that's never possible, but it is to say that I think we always need to be holding both, and especially thinking about what are the ways and the exercises of power that people have that they can actually do something and contribute to, even when it might seem so small and the problems of the world seem so big. Right. I think we need to hold them all together rather than saying problems are too big for the smallness of who we are or what we have access to. And I think maybe that even connects to one of the questions that I see in our chat, which is about the relationship between freedom and democracy, which is something Mark brought up. I think it's something everyone brought up in different ways.
That means freedom and socialism.
But right, given the question about like that, contemporary forms of democracy are so impoverished in their language, in their narrative, and in their practice, then how do we think about that in terms of freedom, right? Our ability to see things, to think about these freedom at multiple scales, but also kind of democracy at multiple scales and how that plays out. I don't know if there's somebody who...
Mark, do you want to jump in on this, or I can jump in on freedom and
Sure.
democracy?
Yeah. Before I jump into freedom and democracy, just to follow up a little bit on Libby's earlier comment. I mean, I find this really fascinating to think about, kind of more organic, small scale freedom, not in a belittling sense, but in a individual actions being empowering and expansive of one's freedom, as and very different from large scale actors. But tying that to the climate crisis for me in really interesting ways creates huge opportunities. So, Aziz raised this question of, do we have time to be utopian? And I think right now is the best time to dream and dream big, precisely because we need to rewrite our political and economic institutions in foundational ways far more quickly, I think, than we have historically because of the climate crisis. If there is a silver lining to the climate crisis, it is that it is going to force a tremendous amount of change. Now, that's not going to say that it's going to force change for good, right? I mean, I think we know that if we are not intentional about it, if we do not think big and act and organize, that the change that will inevitably occur will deepen existing inequities and will continue to further limit freedom and perhaps even roll back existing freedoms. But it also, I think, opens up just a tremendous opportunity right now for us to think about how do we expand.
As a reminder, we are watching Radical Revolutionary Socialists. Radical Revolutionary Socialists are not the Malthusians. They are not the WEF. They are not Klaus Schwab. They are not part of that group. In fact, these people hate the WEF. They hate them. They'll take their money to fund their projects, but they don't like them and they're not going to work with them and they're going to fight with them at some point. So no, he's not. He's not. This is one of the lies that conservatives have told their audiences that is just not true. These are not the same groups of people at all.
Freedoms and how do we expand access to quality livelihoods? Because look, nobody can think about surviving the climate crisis alone. I mean, I hope Elon Musk heads to Mars. That's fine, but we even see that the billionaires building their bunkers for thousands of years into the future, flooding, but before they even hit the 10-year-old mark. So I do think the climate crisis highlights in ways that people often insulate themselves from just how of a collective project we are in together. And I think that's in ways that really excite me. And in terms of democracy, I mean, And I'm going to tie this to one of the other questions in the chat around free time and leisure.
What would this radical revolutionary socialist going against the WEF look like? Well, okay, so this is my opinion. I believe that the radical revolutionary socialists hold a lot more power in the United States than the WEF does. There'll be a lot of people who disagree with me on that, but it's just like they control the schools. The radical revolutionary socialists control the schools. And so I look at this not in terms of like a globalist thing, but in terms of like, I really only care about what happens in the US. I'm sorry for people that pisses off. I don't give a flying F about what happens internationally. I only care about what happens here. And I think the WEF would succeed globally, but I think the radical revolutionary socialists in the United States have more power, and I think that they would beat them here. Because remember, like with the radical revolutionary socialists in power, it's like you're talking about like, well, BlackRock owns this and that and this other thing, and they have like, and Bill Gates owns all this farmland and da 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 da. It's like, well, when the radical revolutionary socialist wins, BlackRock ain't going to exist anymore in the US. All of Bill Gates' land is going to be taken away, and it's going to be controlled by the radical revolutionary socialists. So it's like, it doesn't really matter what resources they have here, because they have less power here overall than these people do, and they'll just take everything they have. Like Bill Gates going to the gulag, man. Going to the gulag Bill Gates will probably be executed on public television when these people win. That's my thought on it anyway. I could be wrong, but that's my current thought process on it.
So Martin Haglund has this lovely book called This Life that really talks about time as our scarcest asset, our scarcest resource. And I think it's an idea that really resonated with me quite tremendously. And look, let me just talk about when we're all feeling so overwhelmed as it is. We're all working 55, 60 hours a week and have kids and have to do reproductive labor to
like think about what happened in the revolutions, think about what happened in the Russian Revolution. The leaders were executed to make a point. Think about what happened in the French Revolution. They executed them to make a point. Like when the radical revolutionary socialists win here, there can be public executions, man. Like, I'm not even joking about that. I really do believe that. And I believe they are going to win, and I believe they're going to win by 2050 because no one actually cares enough to do anything about it. And yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be like all those high profile people that people are scared about are going to be. It's like when Marie Antoinette was executed in the French Revolution. She was the Queen of France. You would have thought she would have been untouchable at one point, but no, she was executed by the guillotine. The royal family of Russia was executed in a basement. It's like it doesn't matter how powerful you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. When the revolution comes, and they're going to kill every single person in their way. These people are not opposed to violence. They're not. They don't use it as like a first step. A lot of people think decolonization means violent revolution, but it doesn't. They're not opposed to violence, but they'll use it if they have to.
To feed our kids and care for them and the like. It's tremendously overwhelming. But I think that a lack of time is a excellent example of a lack of true freedom. If we don't have time to, engage in life beyond both necessary work time and then the time to reproduce ourselves in the next generation as workers, then what are we doing? We're hamsters on a hamster wheel. What is the point
That's
of this?
not true. That was
and so
propaganda.
I think time is precisely one of the key venues in which we should be contesting the current terrain. And I think people often think about this as rollback and the work day, but I think one of the really undervalued and potentially more politically tractionable areas to attack this is thinking about how do we expand things like PTO and paid vacation time and family leave and just other crucial areas that provide workers more time to be humans and more time to fulfill their identity beyond worker, because nobody can be free if their only identity is worker in terms of being, under a dominating boss, which is where most of us spend the vast majority of our working days.
I just, note something that in the forum, we have a wonderful piece by Julie Rose on just this point about time. I'd strongly recommend that the folks in the chat and the person that raised this to take a look at that essay that makes exactly
They're on the
this
same
point.
team.
And the
Same
centrality of time actually to free experience, and links it in a way that I think is really interesting to the arguments that Will was making. So, Will was emphasizing something that I think is really significant, that freedom is built around notions of power and counterpower, the capacity to be able to collectively organize authority in ways to contest hegemonic forms of domination and control. And that in a deep sense, I think the problem of a lack of institutions in the US is a lack of the foundations for counterpower. But that free time, claiming back your time as a way of engaging in counterpower, it changes the bargaining terms of the relationship between worker and employer. This is one of the ways.
Okay, Big Z Games over on Rumble says, am I the only one who finds it funny that the same ones who pat themselves on the back about a 40-hour work week now want a 32-hour work week? Well, it's not funny at all. It's they believe that when they get rid of capitalism, everyone will work significantly less and you'll have more leisure time. So it's not funny at all. It actually is exactly what they believe. They want as little work as possible, because they believe that when we get rid of the profit motive by eliminating capitalism, then we're going to need far less production and everyone will just have to go to work in the fields for a couple hours a week, and then you have the rest of your time left to be artists. So it's not actually funny at all. It's exactly what they believe.
In which leisure is essential, is like, I think, essential to thinking both about freedom.
The push for less work hours is the push toward. You guys remember how we talked about at the beginning of the video? That these people socially engineer things to nudge everyone slowly and gradually towards socialism. That's a feature, that's not a bug. Everything is to nudge everyone slowly and gradually towards the left. When we're talking about reducing the number of hours worked per week, that is the socialists gradually nudging everyone towards the left. It's a direct attack on capitalism because they're restricting how much the capitalist oppressors can exploit the oppressed workers by saying, we're not going to do 40 hours a week, we're going to do 32. And then after that, it'll be 24. And then after that, it'll be 16. They're slowly nudging everything towards the left. Do you see how that works?
And meaningful control. I just add one thing on democracy before turning it to other folks. That, I think something that came up as a theme in a lot of the comments in the forum that's tied to this is the importance of, and Mark said this explicitly, the importance of thinking of democracy not as a matter of just electoral
We do not
process.
debunk, Stephen.
Though elections obviously are very important, but as something that is deeply embedded.
Do they believe that AI will solve their production problems? They're actually really scared of AI, it seems. Like I've seen mixed reviews of AI, in that they really seem to be afraid of it more than anything, which is confusing to me because it would help solve this work problem. Like, some of them want to embrace it and some of them don't. I don't think they have cohesive messaging around AI yet, to be honest. Because they believe it's going to end up enslaving human beings or whatever. But I don't know.
In how people experience all of the institutions that affect them. It's just deeply embedded in their cultural worlds, in the kind of place that they work, the type of family that they're part of. There's a wonderful piece as well about the importance of changing the terms of the family as a way of actually creating, more emancipatory spaces there. And this really reminds me of an historian and thinker that's been very important to my own writing, this is Lawrence Goodwin, who's a historian of populism. And Goodwin, when he writes about populism, and I think of this as something that's essential to movements generally, talks about how essentially like left movements are about the fact that people inhabit received cultures. They inhabit worlds that are deeply hierarchical, in which they have limited control over the terms of their own life, and they face various kinds of oppression and domination. And what all of these movements are interested in doing is changing those received cultures into something that are movement cultures. In other words, making all of the spaces that they inhabit democratic in the sense that they can actually have their voice heard, assert control, participate in decisions about. And that way of thinking of democracy as embedded in a shift from received to movement culture, or a way of contesting power with counterpower, or a way of like organizing workplaces so that they're embodiments of self-determination, self-rule, depending on how you present this, strikes me as really essential. And that, of course, still recognizes that democracy itself can have all of the exclusions and corrosive implications that we've discussed with freedom. It's not an end run. Like democracy, there's ethno-democracy, there's democracies that are the defense of limiting the capacity of people to move, that are forms of controlling migration, but that there are ways still of linking together freedom and democracy so that people's experiences on a daily life are embodiments of their actual desires and will. Sorry. Will, did you want to jump in on any of this?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a question in the chat that I thought would be worth addressing. It's been, I mean, we've sort of bounced off it in various ways, but it's this one that asks basically whether is there a contradiction between the idea that a left view of freedom is necessarily a universal one, and the idea that a robust concept of freedom has to be grounded in questions of power. Like, and I mean, I think something like this has undergirded some of your comments, Aziz. It's undergirded, I mean, it's undergirded all of our comments in some way or another, I think. And someone else in the chat asked about like what's the difference between freedom and liberation, or is there a difference between freedom and liberation? I think these are important questions. I also think that, I think one of the things that comes out of
Allison asked, do they ever disagree with each other openly? Do you know what they do? Does anyone know, has anyone here done improv? I've never done improv, but I know a little bit about improv. Improv has this game where it's like yes and. You're not allowed to say no in improv. If you say no, it ruins everything. But if you say yes and, you get to continue whatever scene you're doing, right? So these people never say no. They're affirming, but they say yes and, right? It's like they acknowledge and affirm what another person says, and then they say, and this other thing. So it's like they say, okay, I understand your perspective, and then, and what about this too? 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 Because they're collectivists, right? And so they have to figure out a way to exist within a collectivist system. And this is where like all of the gender affirming stuff comes in. It's like why they're so like, you have to affirm everyone. This is part of how they communicate with each other. It's like, yes, you're in the best place for your lived experience, and we have this other thing over here, and then there's another thing on top of it, and then there's another thing on top of it. That's what they do.
The issue as a whole, or the whole forum around reclaiming freedom is, I think for most of us, like freedom it's an inherently sort of unruly political ideal, right? It's not, and I think connecting it to power underscores that in a particular way. That, yeah, the attempts to get free always themselves mean building power, and building power is always going to have its blind spots. You know, you're going to build institutions to contest existing power, and those institutions are themselves going to subordinate some people's desires to other people's desires. So a classic example of this is you can't have unions You can't have a union movement without like strong cultures of solidarity. And part of that strong cultural solidarity is also like anti-scab norms, right? So if you want unions, and if you think that unions are good ways of workers building power and gaining greater freedom, both at work and greater freedom from work, then you have to accept that the creation of those institutions is also going to involve imposing certain things on some individual workers, right? If you try to cross the picket line, you're going to get called a scab. You're going to be shunned perhaps by your community. You're going to be intimidated. You might get beat up, right? Like that. There are enforcement mechanisms for norms. Like you can't have an institution unless there are norms and rules, and you can't have those unless you have enforcement mechanisms. Those are going to make certain individuals unfree for the sake of the larger fight for freedom. And I think that's always true. Like that's part of what any
he's flat out saying it. He's flat out saying it. Some people are more equal than others. Some people have more freedom than others. He's flat out saying it. Hang on, let's go back.
Right? If you try to cross the picket line, you're going to get called a scab. You're going to be shunned perhaps by your community. You're going to be intimidated. You might get beat up, right? Like that. There are enforcement mechanisms for norms. Like you can't have an institution unless there are norms and rules, and you can't have those unless you have enforcement mechanisms. Those are going to make certain individuals unfree for the sake of the larger fight for freedom.
Some individuals will be unfree for the sake of the larger system because the community, the collective, is going to force norms on everyone. And if you disagree with those norms, like if you want to go to work instead of strike with the union, then you are going to be unfree and they're going to beat the shit out of you for violating their community norms. He's literally saying some animals are more equal than others.
And I think that's always true. Like that's part of what any attempt to get free is going to produce forms of unfreedom. And sometimes those forms of unfreedom can be justified by what they do for the larger movement, and sometimes they can't. Sometimes they overwhelm the movement. Sometimes they end up producing something that is worse than what we had before. But I think that notion that yes, freedom is a matter of power, and that means it's a matter. It's going to be messy, and there's no simple way of just getting free by somehow being free automatically or magically.
Well, can I ask you a question on this? Which is, so I can't tell whether or not this is a disagreement. That I don't necessarily view all circumstances in which people's wills are thwarted as an indicator that they're unfree. And in a way, I see this as a potential difference between elements of the left and liberal.
I don't view all systems in which people's wills are thwarted to mean they are unfree. He's talking about subverting our will, thwarting our will. That's fucked up, man.
In other words, there's a way in which universality, or the idea of universal freedom for certain kinds of liberal politics, assumes that there needs to be consensus. In other words, like unless everybody agrees to a certain set of arrangements, then some people are necessarily unfree. And I read some elements of like left tradition as saying no, that precisely because society as you know.
This is why, by the way, this is why libertarians don't believe in democracy. Because what he's talking about is the tyranny of the majority, is the community forcing the majority, forcing their will on the minority, and then saying, it's democracy, bro. That's what he means when he says thwarting their will. Saying, we have more people than you, we won, haha, therefore your freedom is what we define it as because we won. Well, no, bro, that's not actually how it works. That's a tyranny of the majority. Hang on, we got Tayton with a super chat. Thank you, Tayton. That's why they push for unions, because it's an FU to property owners. And for me, I am non-union, so I can cross a picket line to work and get paid. I don't have to struggle. Yeah, fuck unions. And I know that's going to upset a lot of people. I realize it. I understand that. But every union leads back to these people. These people created unions. Unions come from these people to thwart the private property owner. And I understand that not everyone in a union is a socialist. Many people are forced to be in unions, which if you think about it, it's really effed up that they can force you to be in a union if you don't want to be in the union. Like, that by itself is effed up. But I understand that some people like unions. I understand that some people see benefits to unions. But it all goes back to a really evil place, and it's these people. Unions were created as a fuck you to property owners. Exactly. Unions are unfree.
Everybody here, written extensively, divided between those with power and those without, that there are these structural, foundational divisions, that the condition by which everybody gets free is necessarily winners and losers. Some people will actually have to be defeated politically. And that defeat means that their will be thwarted, but that they're therefore unfree. Because, take King, the thought is that the interest, like the condition by which Black people are liberated in the US is the condition by which everyone is liberated, even if some range of people end up losing politically or necessarily have to lose politically. And that there's a kind of liberal desire to imagine that this can take place through consent.
Exactly. Unions are gay. Exactly, Tayton. Exactly. All right, guys, I need to go to the little socialist room. I'll be right back. Take notes for me in the chat. Let me know if they said anything important. I'll be right back.
Mutual agreement, and that's foundationally tied to a liberal view that unless your will is being articulated in every single circumstance, and somehow you're unfree.
Yeah, and I think there is a disagreement here, but it's not quite that one. I want to try to have a third option between those two, because I think you're unfree if you're like subject to a power that can thwart not just your wishes, but can impact your interests in a way that you can't control. And for me, that's what it means to be dominated, and I think that's what it means to be unfree fundamentally, is to be subject to that power. So that means I don't want this notion of in order to freedom is just this space of consensus, but I also don't. I think the notion that
Ketson.
Well, it's really
bite your tongue. Bite
the
your
long-term or higher interest of the king to be a free participant in, just a citizen, just part of the universal class of free and equal persons. Like, that's a sort of moral interest that I think that's also a bit convenient, right? That gives us, I think that makes, it gives us an excuse to disregard what people say they want. It gives us a reason to disregard what people say they care about, in the name of saying, well, but your real interests are some other thing that I know. And according to those real interests, you're going to be free. We're going to force you to be free, right? And I guess I want to refuse both of those and just say, like, yeah, like someone who thinks that, yeah, like just like any other worker, they're working in order to feed their family. They're working in order to get enough money to live. And now, like, a bunch of other people who didn't talk to them are saying to them, well, no, you have to not work. You have to not work and be on our side. And only if we all bind together, then we'll be able to get better concessions from the boss, and we'll be able to be freer. And if that one person says, no, I want to work, I want to get my paycheck, and that's what I want, I don't think we can say, well, we're going to force you to be free by joining us. I think we have to just bite the bullet and say, no, we're going to exercise some power over you that you can't control. And that's going to be a local freedom that we're going to hopefully justify by actually winning some greater freedom in the end.
Does anybody want to jump on this or on another topic?
Just real quickly, I'll just add that, you know, I think Aziz laid it out nicely in terms of the traditional distinction between left and liberal, and that's my understanding as well. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Will, but maybe you see a bigger distinction between solidarity and freedom than I do, and maybe you see that. And at least what I'm understanding you saying is, for me, solidarity and freedom go hand in hand in more inseparable ways than what I understand you saying. And it sounds like perhaps there's more of a tension in your understanding of freedom between solidarity and freedom. And I think that's if that's the case, I do think that's an interesting distinction to tease out. And that also plays in nicely to the earlier point that, you know, freedom can never be universally, unconditionally won. Right, that there's always going to be a degree of unfreedom and struggle and tension, and that is
unfreedom. God, I cannot get over this fucking unfreedom.
And I think that's probably quite right outside of the you know, utopian writers.
You have freedom, and then you have unfreedom.
I mean, I would just add to that I think some of this goes back to the question about the relationship between democracy and freedom, right? Because if we understand democracy to be having a say in the conditions that govern your life alongside all others who also have a say, or having the power to, you know, to shape the conditions of our lives, there's a way in which that connects very deeply to the understandings of freedom as something like self-rule or self-determination. And then the question is, where does that reside? Is that something that we determine collectively? Is that something having a say? What does that look like? What are the conditions? Is that something that people individually figure out on their own? You know, and I think some of these questions about like the labor union or who has a say ends up being, where do we actually find where that power resides and where it is exercised? How can we have a kind of solidarity of trust of a collective where even if you are not necessarily agreeing, like that's kind of what, you know, that's the shape that the kind of creative conditions that we want to live in can take hold, even if that might not be something that somebody individually is like invested in at any particular time. But I also think that leads us to the question of, what are these visions and can they ever be universal? Or, you know, and I think that they are not, and that they don't have to be, right? Many people have said here that freedom comes out of the specific conditions of domination or conditions of unfreedom, which is what I take to be one of the most important kind of interventions of 20th century critical thought, right? That freedom is not this kind of state of willing or state of existing, but it's always particular and concrete and coming out of, you know, kind of lived conditions of unfreedom that people are fighting for something more. But that doesn't mean then either that what people are fighting for is either the same or that everybody is necessarily, right, that what that is going to be is going to look the same at all times. climate change.
Would you guys, before watching Socialism, ever think that there was like a group of people that used the term unfreedom in a totally unironic manner? These are college professors that are teaching kids, having a serious discussion about unfreedom. Like, would you ever think that this is this is real? This is not a movie. This is not a TV show. This is real. And these are professors at big time effing colleges. It's the most bizarre out of body experience, isn't it? To realize that this is real life, and that these people are winning, and that these people are controlling everything, and they're having a serious discussion about unfreedom, where they are thwarting the will of people who disagree with them. It's crazy, isn't it? Peyton says, if you aren't struggling, it's because you have freedom, and so there's evidence. That's our evidence of unfreedom. Collective assholes. Let me see that again. If you aren't struggling, it's because you have freedom, and so that's our evidence of unfreedom. There are people with freedom, and that means there are people with unfreedom. The people with freedom are the oppressors. The people with unfreedom are the oppressed.
Might be a perfect example of that. And I think, the Kim Stanley Robinson book, Ministry for the Future, helps us to see all of the ways in which people can fight collectively for climate in ways that are exercised different forms of power and freedom that might not align with one another. They're somewhat anarchic in the sense that they originate from different communities and different values, but in the end, they end up collectively, what he calls, revolution in a minor key, or slow revolution of actually, dramatically shifting climate in ways that is not necessarily organized or universal, except for the fact that people all want to live on this earth.
So we're coming close to the end of time. I was going to say one thing on this, which is I do think that Mark is really right to point out a potential tension. I mean these are friendly tensions around this question of solidarity, because it does sound like part of the stakes here is sort of to the extent to which we should defend an idea of freedom that is ultimately inherently almost interdependent, or is freedom something that is like grounded in a way in the individual, and that when individuals have specific desires, needs, wants that society ends up constraining, that is unfree. My worry about that politically is that feels very close to a replication of a kind of libertarian ethic that we've seen sort of metastasized on the right. Conceptually, my worry about it
Those
is
damn
that,
libertarians.
all of the movements that I think of, and here, I'm thinking about like labor republicanism and sort of socialist politics around labor that say, well, how is it that we deal with complex structures of domination, that the only way under conditions of modern complexity to deal with them is through accounts of emancipation that are collective and that understand the collective as having a kind of weight independent of the individual. So I feel like there's a potential tension here. I don't know. I don't go back. Like,
wait.
Hang
on. I want to listen to that again. I apologize. I was looking at a Dylan Mulvaney video on Twitter. I wasn't paying attention. I just want to listen to that again. That was my fault. I was getting bored and I picked up my phone and I was looking at Twitter. Hang on.
About like labor republicanism and sort of socialist politics around labor that say, well, how is it that we deal with complex structures of domination, that the only way under conditions of modern complexity to deal with them is through accounts of emancipation that are collective and that understand the collective as having a kind of weight independent of the individual. So I feel like there's a potential.
So he's distinguishing between like he's saying that like we're only looking at accounts of emancipation that are collective, which has more weight than the individual.
Tension here. I don't know. I don't go back. Like Will can respond, and then we can see if have we missed any questions that we should engage with that folks have raised. But maybe Well, you want to take a?
I'll just respond
I'll
respond very quickly because
was I clear? I don't know if I was clear on the
I think you were clear, and I just want to say, like, to allay any concerns that my fellow panelists have or that sort of thing. I do think that a basic condition of, like, or one of the problems that faces us in trying to figure out how we could have a global left right now is precisely that we're all very aware of how interdependent we are, and therefore of how much our actual basic interests are tied to one another's. And that therefore we need to figure out institutions that do not secure, just institutions that secure local freedom are not.
Hang on, we've got Rottweiler in with a super chat. Thank you, Rottweiler. Also, notice how they themselves never see their movement as anarchist. That's also another dimension of unfreedom. They need a regime to enforce the opposite of unfreedom in a socialist regime. Well, didn't Will say that earlier? Didn't Will basically, when he was going on his unfreedom rant, said there's going to have to be a regime to enforce the freedom, to enforce the rules of the community. Like, and he was saying it in terms of, like, if you break the norms of the community, they're going to beat the shit out of you. But it's like he's saying that there's going to be like a Stasi that forces unfreedom on people who are not following the norms of the community. Anytime these people say they're anarchists, you can never believe them because they want a state. They just want to be the ones in control of it.
Not going to secure freedom for everyone in this globe. It's just not. It's not true. So I completely agree with you that we have to think freedom and interdependency together. And I do think that solidarity is crucial for that.
That means comrade.
I think it's separate from that. Like solidarity is a necessary condition for anything like universal freedom, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that solidarity is itself baked into freedom or part of freedom. That's all. There can be tensions between solidarity and freedom as well.
Libby, I noted that there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to engage with it. Basically, it's about that can freedom be de-idealized in ways that sort of, so can we actually de-idealize freedom if the very long history of freedom and its integral place in society today is inextricably tied to the history that has positioned it as ideal in the first place? I don't know. It's a long question, and but I don't know if there's any reflections that sort of tie to what we've got in the chat here that you wanted to jump in on. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. But
no, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't have time to read the whole question. Although if whoever posed it would like to email me it, I'm super happy to answer it that way. But I guess the question, is about. I mean, maybe this is something that we can all kind of think about as our last moment, because I noticed we also have a question on movement. But maybe it's about what is the, are we ever really even de-idealizing something if so much of our language and inheritance from it is coming from traditions that are otherwise doing different work or otherwise, maybe the question is in part how do we think out of, if we're trying to think about what the world can be differently, how do we think out of forms of freedom that have always been posed that are so violent? Though I think we are also at the same time looking at various traditions that are asking us to think about things in other ways, like something like Labor Republic.
Got another super chat from Tayton. Thank you, Tayton. I really never thought I would ever have to watch history repeat itself. Is this something that is just built into the human narrative psychologically? I mean, there's something to be said for the archetypical journey of the human experience, right? Like, that's archetypes are archetypes for a reason. I think it's because we don't engage with history. Those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it, sort of thing. Like, if you forget history, if you don't learn the lessons of history, if you never learn the lessons of history in the first place, then of course you're doomed to repeat it. This is how we learn, is we make the same mistake over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And like, you hope that eventually you snap out of it and learn, but we're talking about at a collective level, not at an individual level. So it's a lot harder. Yeah, man. Like I said, like I've told this story a million times. Like, when I was 13, 14 years old, I wanted to go to law school to be a First Amendment lawyer. I was really committed to that track for a while, and then I got to be a senior in college, and I was like, or not in college, in high school, and I was like, well, does the world really need First Amendment lawyers? Like, we've got this free speech stuff wrapped up. People understand free speech. They understand the slippery slope. I don't need to go to law school to defend free speech because we understand free speech now. We got it. We got it together. It's like the 2000s. We got it together. We don't need this anymore. And then lo and behold, what do I spend my time doing 20 fucking years later? Is having the same conversations about free speech that we were having in the 90s. Perpetual human condition. All right, guys, we have about 9 minutes left of this presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining me today for Socialism Saturday. If you are not yet subscribed on whatever platform you're watching on, I hope you will subscribe today. That means YouTube, that means Rumble, that means X. Just double check to make sure you're subscribed or following me or whatever. I stream Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. And then on Saturdays, we do Socialism Saturday at 6 p.m. I do appreciate you all coming out. Please make sure to mouth the like button on the way out the door. As a reminder, if you become a supporter on my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com, we do have movie night tomorrow night in the supporter Discord. We're watching some B sci-fi movie that Jennifer is really excited about, but movie nights are always a good time. If you've never been to a movie night, then I definitely recommend you join us. They're always fun. And so I will look forward to seeing everyone at 8 p.m. tomorrow night in the supporter Discord for a nice private movie night. Tayton says, I say this because I always felt the history of memory within us neurologically was to protect us from death and danger. Well, you have to be aware of something to have memory of it, though. If you aren't aware of it, it doesn't work. Play.
Mechanism or other ways of imagining what freedom can be. What does it mean to work alongside other people who practice it? How do we partake in its exercise? And even though I think Will was suggesting, for him, freedom is about a condition of being free, but
Allison,
I would also suggest it is always about, for me at least, how are we exercising what's possible? And that, freedom is about the practice and the exercise rather than the condition. And maybe that's particular to the US context, because I think Americans so often rest in their laurels about this as a place of being free. And that once you are free, like, you've done the work, and whatever you do in its wake doesn't matter because you are, ipso facto free. And so I think, it's that is where I see the work of, like, exercising freedom or practices of movement to work out of.
Should we go around and just final thoughts on this? I'm happy to jump in. I mean, so this question of how to think about the kind of fraught double history of freedom in the U.S. and globally, but let's say specifically in the U.S., that I think Mark is absolutely right. It's the master narrative. I think a significant part of why it's the master narrative has to do with U.S. foundations in settler expansion, that the logic of settlerism created a kind of internal politics that emphasized notions of liberty and freedom in ways that were real for people, but had all of these like destructive consequences. And so for me, I feel like I try to, to the extent possible, to hold two kinds of arguments in common at the same time. One is that for all of this, both in the US and globally, we have really rich traditions that, oftentimes suppressed, but rich traditions nonetheless of various movements and activists that have imagined otherwise, that have genuinely conceived of how we can have a politics that's equal and effective for everyone. And that these traditions are resources, whether or not they're kind of present right now, and that they're part of like a kind of collective memory that has to be safeguarded and marshaled in our own moments. But at the same time, I feel like we have to be, truly realistic about the structural constraints that we face in the present, like what the nature of the world is that we inhabit, the forms of power and domination that exist, the ways in which those forms of power and domination replicate, undermine modes of agency. And by holding the two together, then we can think really seriously about, well, what are the types of agency and action that can be pursued now? And it's one of the reasons why for my piece, I wanted to emphasize the arguments about institutions and the institutional frame that people inhabit, because it strikes me that whatever our goals are, they require having a commitment to narrative.
They do not care what a woman is because they want to abolish all gender. And if Matt Walsh actually understood the people that he was talking about, he would understand that asking them, what is a woman, is not actually the own that Matt Walsh thinks it is, because they don't give a flying fuck what a woman is. They want to abolish all gender.
And I think even truly utopian in the best sense narrative, but an awareness about, well, what are the conditions under which those narratives actually can live and breathe? And then attempting to build the politics through forms of counterpower, through the reconstruction of our daily institutions, workplaces, schools, political communities that allow.
They understand each other totally and completely because they all speak the same language. It's conservatives who do not understand them because conservatives don't take the time to listen to them, because conservatives don't want to understand them, because all conservatives want to do is about nothing on Twitter all day. They understand each other. They understand each other totally. They understand each other completely. They live in this world all day, every day. It is conservatives who do not understand them or their language that is the problem.
Allow actual agency to take root on behalf of something that is genuinely emancipatory. Mark, Will, bring us home. Both of you, I hope.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll just say very quickly that, like, one of the things that I take away from my study of Marx is that, like, part of imagining or part of thinking about what is possible, part of thinking about, analytically thinking about the world, analyzing the powers and structures of the world, is to understand that those structures and that world are in movement. And so part of that analysis has to be identifying like parts of what is moving in the world that might be able to take us somewhere better. And I mean, it does seem to me that right now, both the climate crisis and the
What is a woman? Capitalism forcing people into a gender binary to exploit the reproductive labor as property for producing more capitalism. Exactly, Adrian. Exactly. Well done.
Wars that have plagued us at least since 2001, 2002, have unleashed a movement of refugees that is pretty unparalleled. And I think that thinking about this picks up on that question about freedom of movement. I do think freedom for refugees, freedom of the moving, and movements of refugees and migrants, diasporic movements Like, I think that those might be promising places to start thinking about what sorts of freedom we might be able to build in the next 50 years that might be sustainable.
Mark, final word.
I've really enjoyed this conversation this evening, and I've learned a tremendous amount from my fellow panelists here. I think that parting thoughts are one, I would encourage us all to also think more about how to bring a left vision of freedom to broader audiences. I think that that is not the intent of this forum, or to be clear, but nevertheless, I think that's something that the left has particularly failed at is articulating this vision and working to broaden our tent. And that's something that I want to challenge both myself and all of us to do, is to break down these ideas in ways to help people understand how they can meaningfully fight to expand their freedoms, both in the long run, but also in the here and now. And that can be from fighting for reproductive rights, to fighting for leisure time, to fighting for a wage that means people can, send their kids to school and put food on the table and not worry about rent and healthcare. But we need to continue to help people understand the material as well as political wins to defend, expand, and deepen freedoms today.
Well, thanks so much to all of you for the conversation. Thanks to everybody that joined us online for this discussion, to Haymarket and Boston Review again, and hope to see folks again before too long.
All right.
Thank you, Aziz.
Thank you.
Well done to everyone who made it to the very end. We've got one last super chat from Rottweiler, if my chat wants to cooperate. Radical Marxists have unity and speak in lockstep, whereas conservatives fight each other over a fucking calendar. Ain't that the truth, Rottweiler? Ain't that the truth? Tayton, I feel like this group has a big case of illusionary superiority, like they're the only ones who can define freedom. That's because they live in an echo chamber. They only ever talk to each other. It is a cult. Socialism is a cult. I hope everyone understands that. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. Now, as a reminder, I do not stream on Sundays because I need to maintain my sanity somehow. But what I do on Sundays is I send out a newsletter that looks a little bit like this one. It's not going to be this exact newsletter. If it wants to load for me, there it goes. It's not going to be this exact newsletter because this is last week's newsletter. It's going to be this week's newsletter. In this newsletter, you will not only find a recap of all the stuff I've done this week in terms of streams and articles and merch and breakdown, all this stuff, you will also find your supporter perks. That includes your link to the supporter Discord. It includes your links for the community Zooms that we do. It includes your discount code for the merch store. Every supporter perk will be in this email, and how you find your supporter perks. And so you can join us for movie night at 8 p.m. as you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the email. And underneath that red box for supporters, for people who are supporting me with $8 a month or $80 a year to help fund all of this, you will find all of your information. And this is a good thing to sign up for anyway. Even if you're not a supporter yet, even if you're just a free subscriber to the Substack, you're still going to get access to a lot of news and like a recap of the week in case you missed anything. Lots of stuff always going on. So please head over and at least sign up for free on my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Also, remember, we have the brand new merch in the merch store, which is the Socialists Are Gay design. This is the t-shirt of the design, but it also comes in hoodies, it comes in sweatshirts, it comes in posters. I made a mug. I did lots of stuff. And it's like, I mean, honestly, like I wasn't going to put this on a t-shirt originally. And then I posted it yesterday and everyone said I needed to put it on a t-shirt. So your wish is my command. It is on a t-shirt. Evelyn, thank you for buying it in Australia. I do appreciate it. That is very exciting for me. Guys, if you've ever had trouble purchasing from my merch store because you live internationally, I fixed the problem. I've now had orders from Australia. I've had orders from Canada. I've had orders from France. I've had orders from China. I've had orders from all over the world now that I fixed the international shipping problem in the merch store. So go get yourself some merch. And remember, if you sign up as a supporter of my work, you get 10% off everything. How cool is that? All right, guys, I will see everyone tomorrow in the supporter Discord at 8 p.m. and we will be watching a movie. And I forget what movie we're watching, but it's going to be great. It's always a great time. But thank you guys for spending some time with me on this weekend. And I will be back on Monday for streaming. Guys, take care. Have a good one. We'll see you soon. Bye.